Hey guys, tonight we're time travelling straight into the grimy, fascinating, occasionally terrifying world of 1700s Edinburgh. Yes, you heard right. The land of towering tenements, candlelit streets, and a smell that could knock out a horse. This isn't one of those spend a charming weekend in the past kinds of deals. No, you're living here now. For real. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. But hey, we're going to give it a solid try. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not into fake love. And tell me, what city are you watching from? And what time is it where you are right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you before you even set foot fully onto the cobbled street is the smell. A thick, sour, almost greasy wall of stench, hanging in the air like a second atmosphere. Edinburgh in the 1700s is lovingly nicknamed AULD REEKIE, or Old Smoky, and trust me, it lives up to the name. Smoke curls from every chimney, every hearth, every open fire, cooking something questionable in a back alley. But it's not just smoke you're smelling. It's sewage, it's sweat, it's rotting food and dead animals and God knows what else brewing in the gutters. The air tastes like damp wool soaked in vinegar. You clutch your satchel, modern luggage isn't going to help you here, and start picking your way down the high street, the spine of Old Town. The buildings rise up around you like cliffs, some 7, 8, even 10 stories high. They lean in close, their crooked faces of stone and timber blotting out most of the sky. It's not just dramatic architecture, it's survival. The city is boxed in by walls, so instead of sprawling out, people built up higher and higher, and everyone from rag-picking orphans to powdered ladies with fans lives stacked on top of one another in these monolithic tenements. As you make your way past carts rattling over the stones, and people hawking goods from doorways barely big enough for a dog to crawl through, you start to realise this place is buzzing. No cars, obviously, but the clatter of hooves, the shouts of vendors, the cries of babies, the clang of iron tools, and the occasional splash of something unpleasant from a window above. This city is alive, and loud, and filthy. A kid, barefoot, probably about 8, brushes past you and swipes something from your coat. You whirl around, but he's gone. Welcome to Edinburgh, where pickpockets learn their trade younger than most kids today learn to read. You pull your coat tighter, which, by the way, is absolutely wrong for the era. Everyone is looking at you like you just walked out of a theatre play. Which you sort of did, in a cosmic sense. A group of women in linen caps and heavy wool skirts passes by, one of them carrying a large basket of smoked fish. The smell clings to her like a cloud. A man in a tricorn hat spits something dark onto the street right in front of you and mutters about foreigners. It's not personal. Everyone's suspicious of everyone else here. You're just the newest suspect. You keep moving, up toward the castle. The incline is brutal, the stone under your feet uneven and slick from last night's rain. The city's built on a literal ridge, and you can feel it in your calves already. You pass St. Giles Cathedral, its spire jagged like a crown of thorns. It looks ancient, and it is, but it's also the beating heart of Edinburgh's soul. Sermons, trials, public shaming, it all goes down here. And speaking of shaming, across the square there's a wooden post with iron manacles hanging from it. That's the Tron, where people are tied up and humiliated for minor crimes. You know, like selling watered-down ale or gossiping too loudly. Crime and punishment in this city is very public and very theatrical. Now you might be wondering, who actually runs this place? That'd be the town council, and they are not your friends. Imagine a bunch of aging merchants and landowners, constantly drunk on power and slightly less drunk on actual spirits. Their rules are inconsistent and mostly serve the wealthy. Your survival here will depend on how invisible you can make yourself, or, if you've got guts, how well you can manipulate the system. But wait, what century is this again? Ah yes, the early 1700s. Technically, we're in the Kingdom of Great Britain now, after the 1707 Act of Union merged Scotland and England under one parliament, which, if you ask the locals, is still a sore spot. You'll hear people grumble about it in pubs and on the street. The ink may be dry, but the bitterness is still fresh. You'd be wise to keep your opinions on it to yourself unless you're really ready to debate angry old men over a tankard of something fermented. Oh, and here's a quirky one for you. The buildings here aren't just tall, they're mixed use. Like, really mixed. A single tenement might have a lawyer living on the top floor, a brothel on the third, a candle maker beneath that, and 4 goats wandering around the bottom level. There's no zoning, just survival. So wherever you end up crashing, prepare for the unexpected, like a bucket of offal tossed out a window at dawn, or a bagpipe rehearsal at midnight. Scholars still debate how many people actually lived in the Old Town during this period. Some say it was 40,000, others argue it was closer to 80,000. Either way, that's a whole lot of bodies crammed into a very small vertical slice of land. Overcrowding is the name of the game. Privacy is a myth. If you sneeze, 6 people will probably bless you from 6 different floors. You make it to the edge of the Royal Mile, where the castle looms like a grim guardian over the city. You take a breath, or try to. The air is thick, metallic. Somewhere a dog howls. You glance around and think, this is it. This is home now, and it's only going to get weirder from here. Finding a place to live in 1700s, Edinburgh is like choosing between drowning and burning. You're probably going to suffer either way, but the aesthetics differ. You quickly learn that housing in this city is less about luxury and more about not dying immediately. And you're spoiled for grim choices. You start your search in Old Town because, well, that's where everything is. The Royal Mile cuts like a spine down the city's ridge, and the buildings cling to it like stone barnacles. Every inch is packed. Every stairwell is worn down by centuries of muddy boots. If you're hoping for a cosy little cottage with a garden and a nice view, sorry, wrong century. What you're getting is a single cramped room in a tenement tower, probably halfway up and squeezed between a candlemaker's flat and a widow who cries in Gaelic all night. You'll need to get used to walls so thin you can hear your neighbour's thoughts, and floors so warped they actively try to throw you down the stairs. But here's the thing, not all tenements are created equal. In Edinburgh, height equals wealth. In reverse. The ground floors and first few levels go to the rich folks. These are your lawyers, your merchants, your fancy men with silk waistcoats who never have to touch a chamber pot. They pay handsomely for the privilege of not climbing 8 flights of stairs every day. Above them, the working class. Artisans, tailors, and the occasional street preacher with wild eyes and 3 teeth. And at the very top, where the stairs are steepest, the roofs leak and the air is thinnest, you'll find the poorest of the poor. That's probably you. You shuffle your way into one of these tenements off the Cowgate. The entry smells like wet socks and despair. The staircase coils up into darkness, lit only by faint glimmers of daylight slipping through cracks. It's not romantic, it's not charming, it's an architectural panic attack. You pass a mother hauling water, a boy dragging a dead chicken by the neck, and a cat that may or may not be immortal. Everyone gives you the once-over. You're clearly new, and that makes you suspicious. Your room, let's be generous and call it that, is about the size of a broom closet. There's a single window that doesn't open, 1 straw mattress on a wooden frame, and a cold fireplace that probably hasn't been cleaned since Cromwell came through. You can touch both walls if you stretch out your arms. You lie down on the mattress just to test it. Congratulations, you now have fleas. The landlord is a wiry woman named Mrs. Kemp who runs this place like a pirate ship. She charges rent weekly, in coin or goods. Fall behind, and you're out. No arguments. She tells you this while elbow deep in a rabbit she's skinning for dinner. You nod politely and try not to vomit. Now, if Old Town is a crusty, overboiled soup of humanity, New Town is the part where the cream tries to rise to the top. It doesn't quite exist yet in the early 1700s, but the groundwork is being laid. Literally. The wealthy elites are already dreaming of wide boulevards, orderly rows of Georgian houses and something they call fresh air. Revolutionary stuff. A few of them are even moving out toward the north side into what they claim is going to be the future of Edinburgh. If you ever get rich or married to someone who is, you might claw your way into one of those tidy new squares someday. For now, though, you're in the thick of it. You settle into your room and listen to the city groan around you. Above, someone is hammering, maybe making shoes, maybe breaking through the floor. To your left, a couple argues loudly in Scots. To your right, a baby wails and something shatters. Below you, the air smells like rotting cheese and soot. Privacy doesn't exist here. Every movement you make, every cough, every poorly timed fart is public knowledge. You start to understand why people in this era speak in hushed tones and keep their secrets close. Even your dreams don't feel private. The walls absorb them. By the way, here's a curious fact. In many of these tenements, strangers are packed into rooms together. Renting a space doesn't mean you get it all to yourself. You might be sharing with a family of 5, a sailor who only comes home on Sundays, and a journeyman stonemason who talks in his sleep and smells like fish. So the fact that you've got your own little flea hut is actually a win. Now, scholars debate whether the urban crowding in Edinburgh was worse than in other major European cities of the time. London was enormous, yes, but it sprawled. Paris was dense but less vertical. Edinburgh's unique thing was its height. Some call it the first modern skyscraper city. Others say it was just a stack of outhouses pretending to be architecture. What's clear is that people lived on top of each other, physically, emotionally, and sometimes literally if the ceilings collapsed. You spend your first night huddled in your scratchy blanket, listening to the wind whistle through a cracked shutter. Outside you hear drunk men singing and the clip-clop of horses on the cobbles. At some point someone dumps a bucket out the window. It splashes nearby, and you pray it was just water. You fall asleep eventually, lulled by the sounds of a city that never truly rests. Only mutters and stumbles into the next day. In the morning you wake up with a stiff neck and 2 flea bites on your ankle. You've survived your first night. Barely. You open the window and take a deep breath of fresh. Never mind. You close it again. You wake up with a new understanding of what the phrase pungent reality really means. The moment your eyes open, the scent hits you like a backhand to the face. Sharp, sour, and entirely unapologetic. It's in your clothes, your bedding, your hair. The entire city has a signature stench, like a long marinated stew of coal smoke, body odour, spoiled food, damp stone, and human waste. Welcome to the olfactory gauntlet of 1700s Edinburgh. You're tempted to ask if something died under your floorboards, but then you remember it probably did, or is currently in the process of dying. There's a rat somewhere in the walls, you're sure of it, and it's having a full existential crisis. You step outside and immediately regret it. The main street, the Royal Mile, is already awake and reeking. There's a thick haze of smoke swirling low between the tall buildings, like the city is trying to fog itself out of existence. Fires burn in nearly every hearth. Coal, wood, peat, and sometimes whatever trash people can find. Coal soot clings to every window, every ledge, every shirt. You wipe your hand along a windowsill and it comes away black like a chimney sweep's handshake. Now here's the fun part. In Edinburgh, there's no sewer system. Let that sink in. There's a law, sort of, that says you're supposed to dump waste onto the street only after yelling Gardyloo first to warn passers-by. The phrase comes from the French "regardez l'eau." Watch out for the water, though it's rarely just water. You hear the cry shouted from above and instinctively jump to the side. A suspicious slop crashes just behind you. You're pretty sure there was a sock in it. The gutters here are called closes and wins, but they function as public drainage channels, overflowing with runoff from households, slaughterhouses, and whatever else slides downhill with gravity's help. The slope of the Royal Mile doesn't just make for a scenic walk, it's a disgusting river of everything unwanted. You pass a man scrubbing the steps in front of his shop with a rag that looks like it hasn't been cleaned since Mary Queen of Scots was a thing. A butcher pours something red into the gutter without flinching, and every so often the wind shifts just right, and the stench claws its way into your nostrils like an angry ghost. There's no escape, not even in church, where the smell of unwashed bodies and damp wool mingles with incense and candle smoke to create a scent so powerful it could knock you into a religious vision. And it's not just your imagination. Contemporary visitors wrote about Edinburgh's overwhelming smell with a mix of awe and revulsion. Even in a century where every city had its own bouquet of filth, Edinburgh stood out. Some compared it to a chimney that nobody bothered to sweep. Others were more poetic, calling it a city choking on its own breath. You can't help but agree. The city is a living organism, and it's definitely not washing its armpits. There's one alleyway, Nidri's Wynd, where the air is so thick with rot and refuse that you hold your breath the entire time you pass through. It's the kind of smell that sticks to your soul. You come out the other end with tears in your eyes and a newly developed gag reflex. Strangely, no one else seems to mind. Children run barefoot through puddles that would send a modern health inspector into cardiac arrest. Women sweep filth from one corner of the street to the other in a Sisyphean effort at cleanliness. And people just live like this, because there is no better for them. This is the norm. You're the weird one for recoiling. Here's a fringe fact you probably didn't want. There's a popular belief among locals that the stink protects them. Yep, There's this whole idea that the smoke and foul air act as a barrier against illness, especially the plague. After all, bad air brings disease, right? So if you flood your lungs with bad smells on purpose, maybe you'll build immunity. It's flawed logic, but in a time before germ theory, it's what they've got. You make a mental note not to laugh at this too loudly in public. As you wander down Cannon Gate, where the buildings are slightly less suffocating and the sky occasionally peeks through, you spot what looks like an attempt at a city cleanup. A group of men with long-handled scrapers are clearing waste from the gutters, pushing it into piles to be carted away. It's better than nothing, but not by much. The piles still sit there for hours, sometimes days, before they're removed, and by then they've taken on a life of their own. Scholars still argue how effective these rudimentary cleaning systems were. Some claim Edinburgh had one of the better sanitation efforts for the time. Others say that's like calling the least maggoty apple in the barrel fresh. There's evidence of organised street sweeping, but also plenty of evidence that it didn't happen nearly often enough. You've stepped over enough questionable puddles to pick your side of that debate. You find a public well and approach it like a pilgrim reaching a holy site. The water is cold, clear, and miraculously doesn't smell like decay. It's one of the few semi-clean water sources in the city shared by entire neighbourhoods. You cup your hands and take a cautious sip. It tastes like iron and moss, but it's the best thing you've had all day. A woman next to you fills her bucket, muttering something in a thick brogue you can't understand. You smile anyway. It's polite to pretend. You end the day with your cloak drawn tightly around you, nose buried in the wool like it might save you. It won't. The smell clings to your skin, your clothes, your very aura. You smell like 1700s Edinburgh now, and there's no going back. At night the streets seem calmer, but the odour never leaves. Smoke still pours from windows, chamber pots still empty out overhead, and that sweet perfume of rot, coal and humanity just keeps curling through the alleys like a bad joke. You fall asleep trying not to breathe through your nose and wondering how long it takes before you stop noticing it altogether. Probably just long enough to start thinking it's normal. And that, honestly, might be the most terrifying part. You wake up determined. You're going to blend in today, or at least stop looking like you time-travelled here by accident, and that means figuring out how to dress like someone who belongs. Not too poor, not too rich, and definitely not like an alien in denim and zippers. Let's be honest. Fashion in 1700s, Edinburgh isn't about personal expression, it's about survival. And not just from the cold, which is ever-present and bone-deep, but from scrutiny. Wear the wrong thing and you might be mistaken for a beggar, a prostitute, or worst of all, a foreigner with money. That last one is an open invitation to get robbed, overcharged, or accidentally accused of witchcraft. So you start your day by trying to track down some local clothes. Lucky for you, there's no shortage of used garments for sale. You head toward the grass market, where merchants sell everything from second-hand waistcoats to mysterious boots that may or may not still contain parts of the last owner. The air smells like damp leather and old wool, which compared to yesterday is practically a spa treatment. There's a stall run by a woman with windburned cheeks and a voice like gravel. She eyes you suspiciously before holding up a bundle of clothing. "This'll do," she says, offering you a shapeless shirt, a pair of breeches that look like they were once curtains, and a thick woolen coat with mismatched buttons. You nod, trying to look grateful. There's no dressing room, just an alley and a hope that no one walks by while you're half naked. You change quickly, stuffing your modern clothes deep into your satchel, like they're evidence of a crime. Looking at your reflection in a puddle, you're not half bad. The coat fits. The shirt smells like onions and old paper, but it fits too. The breeches. Okay, they ride up a bit, but they'll do. You even manage to tie a crude neckcloth like you've seen other men wear. Lopsided, sure, but a solid first attempt. Fashion in this city says everything about who you are. The wealthy strut around in vibrant colours, powdered wigs, and polished shoes. The poor stick to dull earth tones and materials that scratch and stink. You've chosen the safe middle, worn but not ragged, functional but not flashy. The goal is invisibility, and you're getting there. You start to notice how others are dressed as you pass through the winds and closes. Women wear bodices, petticoats, and linen caps tied tight around their heads. No one shows much skin, both because of the cold and because modesty is enforced by public opinion and the ever-watchful church. Children wear miniature versions of adult clothes, like tiny factory workers or grim little dolls. Everyone is layered, wrapped, bundled. Fabric is reused, repurposed, and rarely washed. It's clothing as armour, both literal and social. Here's a quirky fact. Scottish fashion at this time is in flux. The Act of Union in 1707 didn't just change politics, it messed with people's sense of national identity. Tartan, which would later become a proud symbol of Scottish culture, was starting to carry political weight. If you wear the wrong pattern, or any tartan at all depending on who's watching, you might be seen as a Jacobite sympathiser, and that's a good way to get arrested or worse. There's still debate among historians about how banned tartan really was during the early 1700s. The actual Dress Act that prohibited it doesn't pass until 1746, after the Jacobite uprising, but tensions are already simmering. Some scholars argue that anti-tartan sentiment existed before the law, especially in cities like Edinburgh, where British influence was strongest. Others think most urban Scots had already swapped plaid for plainer, more English-style clothing. Either way, you decide to avoid it entirely. No need to accidentally join a rebellion because of your outfit. You also notice a lack of accessories. Jewellery is rare unless you're wealthy, and even then, modesty is key. No flashy rings or golden chains here. Those will just get you mugged or accused of vanity. You keep your hands in your pockets and your gaze low. You're starting to feel the rhythm of the place. Not comfortable, but less like a target. Footwear is another ordeal. Shoes are made of stiff leather and rarely match. Most are handmade, and most have seen better decades. You settle on a pair that are mostly intact and only mildly damp. They pinch your toes, but they're better than going barefoot like some of the street kids who look like they've never known a sock in their lives. There's a moment. You're walking past a group of fishwives shouting over each other when you realise no one's staring at you anymore. No one's pointing. No one's whispering. That one's not from around here. You're just another body in the crowd. Unremarkable. That's when you know you've passed your first real test. Now let's talk grooming, or the lack thereof. Hair in the 1700s is less about style and more about avoiding lice. You notice that most men either crop their hair short or tie it back in a queue. Wigs are a thing, sure, but they're expensive and high maintenance. Plus they attract fleas like an all-you-can-eat buffet. You slick your hair back with a bit of grease from yesterday's meat pie and call it a look. It's not good, but it's authentic. Bathing? Ha! You're adorable. No one here bathes regularly. It's actually suspicious to be too clean. Some people think hot baths open your pores to disease. You wipe your face with a damp cloth and consider yourself freshened up. There's something liberating about lowering your standards. You scratch your armpit and wonder if this is the beginning of personal freedom or the end of dignity. By evening, you're blending in. You've mastered the walk, head down, purposeful stride, occasional grunt of acknowledgement. You've even picked up some local slang, though most of it still sounds like angry gargling. You sit in a tavern corner sipping weak ale, surrounded by people who, for the first time, don't treat you like a sideshow. You belong here, or at least you look like you do. That's half the battle. Your stomach starts making threats around mid-morning, like a grumpy tenant banging on the walls. You realise it's been, 2 days since you had anything that could reasonably be called a meal. The ale from last night doesn't count, even if you told yourself it was liquid bread. Time to figure out how people in 1700s Edinburgh feed themselves without catching something unspeakable. Eating in this century is, let's say, a high-stakes adventure. There are no expiration dates, no clean kitchens. Most people cook with ingredients you wouldn't feed to your neighbour's dog, if they cook at all. If you want to survive, you've got to learn how to sniff out not just food, but safe food, which is a whole separate category. You head back down to the grass market where vendors are setting up their stalls. The street is a carnival of questionable smells and louder voices. A fishmonger slaps 2 pale fillets onto a table, and you can feel their dead eyes following you. A pie seller waves something golden and steaming under your nose. It smells promising, until you ask what's inside. She grins. Pigeon? Maybe. You back away slowly. Street food is everywhere, but nothing is labelled, and you quickly learn that asking too many questions is frowned upon. In fact, if you do ask, they'll know you're not local, and the price will triple, so instead, you learn to observe. Locals hover around the baked goods stall run by a burly man in a flour-stained apron. That's a good sign. You get in line and snag a small oat bannock, thick, dense and slightly charred. It tastes like someone baked a brick using regret and barley, but it's warm and fills the gap. Grain-based foods are your safest bet. Bread, bannocks, porridge, you can't really fake oatmeal. And bonus, it's harder to get food poisoning from oats Then from mystery meat that's been sitting out in the sun, you make a mental note to stick with the basics. But of course, you're not here just to survive on bland mush. Eventually you want something hot, maybe even flavourful. That's when you learn about Edinburgh's taverns and chop houses. They're everywhere, ranging from cosy dens with roaring hearths to shady back rooms where roast beef is a generous euphemism. You wander into one of the slightly less terrifying ones, the thistle and turnip, and manage to find a corner seat. The smell of grease and smoke hangs thick in the air like a curtain of calories. A serving girl slaps a wooden bowl in front of you with something grey and bubbling inside. Scotch broth, she says. You nod like you know what that means. It turns out to be a watery stew with barley, root vegetables, and maybe a trace of lamb if you squint, but it's hot and heavily salted, and after 3 spoonfuls you're deeply, irrationally grateful. A man across from you is gnawing on what might be a sheep's head. He catches you staring and grins through his teeth. Want a bit of cheek, he offers. You decline, politely. He shrugs and goes back to scraping the eyeball. See, people here don't waste parts. Nose to tail is a way of life. Tongue, liver, brain. If it doesn't fight back, it's food, and often even if it does. Butchers are skilled, but preservation methods are iffy at best. Salt is king, smoking helps, and fresh is a relative term. You learn to use your nose as your guide, and to never trust a meat pie with no visible filling. Here's a weird historical nugget. Oysters, now considered a fancy delicacy, are dirt cheap in 1700s Edinburgh. They're poor people's food, harvested in bulk and sold by street vendors. You try one. It's slimy, fishy and cold, and it slides down your throat with a texture that haunts you for the rest of the day. Not your thing, apparently. Water is a risky business, so most people drink small beer or ale even for breakfast. It's weak, barely alcoholic, and safer than the city's water, which may or may not contain bits of rat. You grab a pint and sip. It's warm and flat, but it doesn't taste like death. Win. You also notice something peculiar. People rarely eat alone. Meals are social affairs, even among strangers. You share a bench with a young man who works at the tannery. His hands are permanently stained, his nails black with something you decide not to ask about. But he shares a heel of bread with you, and tells you about the food riots from a few years ago, when grain prices spiked and the city nearly tore itself apart. Aye, he says, chewing thoughtfully, folk will kill each other over a loaf, and that's just a Tuesday. There's an open debate among historians about whether Edinburgh's food supply in the 1700s was stable, or constantly teetering on the edge of disaster. Some argue the city had enough trade and local agriculture to keep the markets full. Others point to frequent famines, riots, and food adulteration as signs of chronic scarcity. You lean toward the second group after watching a rat dart across a cheese wheel on open display. By late afternoon, you've eaten 2 bannocks, a bowl of broth, half a bruised apple, and about a pint and a half of weak ale. You're not full, but you're functional, and more importantly, you haven't died from dysentery. Yet, you pass a confectioner's stall on your way back to your tenement. A tray of barley sugar twists glistens in the window. They're wildly expensive. Sugar is still a luxury, but you cave and buy one. It tastes like caramelized heaven. For the first time since arriving in this era, something tastes right. Sweet, simple, joyful. You let it dissolve on your tongue as you climb the steps back to your room. That night you fall asleep with a faint stickiness on your lips and an unfamiliar feeling in your chest. Satisfaction, pride, or maybe just the knowledge that you didn't starve today. It's enough. You wake up to the sound of coughing, deep, wet, unrelenting. It's not coming from you, thankfully, but from somewhere nearby. Through the paper-thin walls of your tenement, you can hear your neighbour hacking up what sounds like a lung, maybe 2. Welcome to the ever-charming world of 1700s public health, where staying healthy just means not actively bleeding out or losing a limb before lunch. You stretch and immediately regret it. Your neck's stiff, your back's sore, and something definitely bit you in the night. Possibly several somethings. You're starting to understand why people here look perpetually exhausted. The idea of wellness in this century is less about yoga and juice cleanses, and more about just not dying this week. Time to investigate what passes for medical care in this city. First off, you need to abandon all modern instincts. There are no hospitals in the way you're used to. There is the Royal Infirmary, founded in 1729, so technically you're just in time, but it's small, experimental, and reserved mostly for those without any other option. Think of it less as a hospital, and more as a scientific curiosity, where they poke you with things and hope for the best. Instead, most people rely on a mix of home remedies, apothecaries, and the occasional barber surgeon. That's right. Your local barber not only cuts hair, he might also yank out your rotting tooth, lance your boils, or saw off your infected toe with a rusty blade and a splash of whiskey. It's multitasking at its finest. You make your way down the Royal Mile, eyes scanning the crooked signs hanging over shop fronts. Eventually you find a wooden plaque with a faded red and white pole, the traditional symbol of a barber surgeon. Inside, the air is thick with iron, soap, and something vaguely herbal. A man in an apron is cleaning a blood-stained sore with all the casualness of someone wiping down a dinner plate. He grunts a greeting and gestures for you to sit. No, just looking, you manage. He shrugs and goes back to muttering to himself about humours and black bile. You back out slowly, vowing to keep all your limbs. That's when you start hearing about the real stars of the medical scene. The apothecaries. These are your potion mixers, your local chemists, your go-to folks for anything from fever to heartbreak. You find one tucked into a narrow alley, its windows cluttered with dusty jars filled with mysterious substances. The apothecary himself is a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a grin that reveals several teeth missing in action. He offers you a tonic for internal chills, which looks like syrup and smells like pine and regret. You buy it anyway, more for the experience than any belief that it'll work. He also tries to sell you a thistle poultice, guaranteed to ward off phlegm and melancholy, and you nod like that's a normal thing to say. It's clear that medicine here is a strange cocktail of folklore, superstition, and guesswork. A quirky fact you discover over a bowl of barley broth later that day. Many people in this era believe illness is caused by an imbalance in the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Feel depressed? Too much black bile. Got a rash? Maybe your yellow bile is getting feisty. The treatment? Bloodletting, emetics, purging, leeches, basically anything that makes you feel worse in the hopes you'll somehow end up better. And if you're really unlucky, you might be told your sickness is divine punishment, a moral failing, something that can only be cured with prayer, fasting, or public humiliation. The church still holds a strong grip on people's understanding of illness, and being unclean spiritually is often equated with being contagious. There's still some scholarly debate about how much access the average person had to medical care. Some argue Edinburgh was ahead of its time, with a relatively educated medical class and new ideas flowing in from the Enlightenment. Others point to the city's still high mortality rates, especially among infants and the poor, as proof that theory rarely translated into practice. From what you've seen so far, both things can be true. You head toward the Cowgate, where the city's poorest live in the shadow of the richer districts above. This is where disease thrives. The alleyways are damp and dark, the air heavy with mildew and smoke. You spot a makeshift clinic, a single room with a cot, a bucket, and a woman in a threadbare shawl tending to a boy with a fever. She's not a doctor, but she knows what herbs help reduce swelling and how to keep wounds clean. These are the unsung healers, the grannies, midwives, and neighbours with practical knowledge and calloused hands. You leave a coin on the table and slip away. Speaking of childbirth, don't even think about it. It's a dangerous, often fatal event for both mother and child. There are no sterile rooms, no anaesthesia, no understanding of infection. Just screaming, prayer, and maybe a midwife who's delivered enough babies to know when things are going south. You decide that celibacy is probably the safest path forward. Later that evening, you find yourself coughing. Nothing serious, but enough to worry you. You light a candle, sip some of the pine tonic, it's terrible, and wrap yourself tighter in your cloak. You remember the average life expectancy in this era is somewhere around 35. Less if you're poor, more if you're lucky and avoid plague, childbirth, bad surgery, or street violence. You do some quick mental math and realise you're already pressing your luck. You crawl into your scratchy bed with the scent of burning tallow in your nose and a newfound respect for anyone who made it past middle age. There's no wellness culture here, no gym memberships or kale smoothies, just people trying not to rot, fall apart, or get bled to death by a man with a saw. You drift off to the sounds of coughing on the floor above and a rat chewing something in the wall. It's oddly comforting. You survived another day without having to pick which limb you could most afford to lose. That, in this era, practically qualifies as thriving. You wake up feeling itchy. again. At this point, you've accepted that your relationship with personal hygiene has fundamentally changed. You're not clean. You're clean enough to not raise eyebrows, which is the 1700s equivalent of winning a gold medal in grooming. You sit up and scratch at your neck, then at your leg, then at a mystery spot on your hip you can't quite reach. A flea jumps off your blanket like it's late for work. You sigh. Time to figure out how people in this century pretend to be clean without access to, cleaning. Let's get one thing clear right away. Bathing is not a daily activity here. It's not even a monthly one for most folks. Full-body baths are viewed with suspicion, and in some circles, outright fear. Many believe that immersing yourself in hot water opens the pores and lets disease in. Like the water invites death in for tea. If you're too clean, people don't envy you. They question your judgment, or your morals. So how do people wash? The short answer, creatively. The long answer, with rags, buckets, spitting into their hands, and blind optimism. You start your hygiene journey by trying the most obvious solution, finding a bathhouse, and you actually do. It's a rare find tucked down a narrow lane behind a cooper's shop, marked by a faded wooden sign with the word bathe carved into it like an afterthought. You step inside and are hit with a wall of heat, steam, and something vaguely medicinal. It smells like wet socks steeped in mint. The bathhouse keeper gives you a look like he's deciding whether or not to call the constable, but eventually waves you in. The baths are communal, shallow, and about as private as a family reunion in a one-room hut. There's one tub, currently occupied by a middle-aged man with a red nose, a serious expression, and half a cabbage floating beside him. You sit on a bench and try not to make eye contact. Eventually you get your turn. The water is lukewarm and filled with little particles that you try not to examine too closely, but still, you're submerged. You scrub at your skin with a cloth provided by the bathhouse, which is somehow both damp and crusty. You think about lice. Then you think about how many people have used this tub today. Then you try not to think at all. You emerge not exactly clean, but rinsed, which is good enough. The bathhouse keeper hands you a towel that smells like it's seen things. You dry off, dress, and pay your coin, feeling like you've just performed a ritual more symbolic than sanitary. Of course, most people don't even get that. For the majority of Edinburgh's residents, personal hygiene is handled in pieces. Face and hands in the morning, maybe feet at night if they're feeling fancy. Hair is rarely washed. Instead it's powdered, tied back, or hidden under caps and bonnets. You've started wearing a scarf over your head. Not for fashion, but as a parasite deterrent. You're not ashamed. There's a quirky piece of folk wisdom floating around. Rubbing vinegar on your body keeps lice away. You try it once. It burns your armpits and leaves you smelling like a salad. But hey, no lice that day. Coincidence? Maybe. Effective? You're not ruling it out. For your teeth, the options are primitive. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, and definitely no floss. People chew on twigs, rinse with ale or salt water, and occasionally scrape their teeth with a small knife. You try rubbing ashes on your gums like you've heard some locals do. It tastes like barbecue and sadness, but your breath doesn't smell like death afterward, so you count it as progress. Clothing hygiene is even worse. Most people own only one or two outfits. Washing clothes is a production that involves hauling water, boiling it, scrubbing fabric on washboards, and praying it doesn't fall apart in the process. You pass a group of women doing laundry in a communal courtyard, sleeves rolled up, arms red from the cold. They're chatting, laughing, beating shirts against stones. You consider asking to join, but remember how much you paid for your current outfit, and decide you'd rather not risk it. Instead, you follow the time-tested Edinburgh method. Air it out and hope for the best. You hang your coat near the fireplace overnight, flip your breeches inside out every few days, and shake your shirt like you're trying to exorcise demons. You're becoming a master of low-maintenance cleanliness. Here's where the scholarly debate kicks in. Some historians argue that people in the 1700s weren't as dirty as we assume. They point to surviving records of soap-making, clean linens, and etiquette guides that emphasise neatness. Others argue these accounts focus only on the upper classes, and that for the average person, staying clean was more ideal than reality. Based on your own experience, you lean toward the latter. No one here smells like roses. Most people smell like firewood, sweat, and hard decisions. One underrated part of personal hygiene you didn't expect: your hands. You quickly learn that touching things, door handles, market goods, the wooden railing in your tenement, is basically gambling. Dirt lives on everything. Soap exists but is expensive, hard to make, and often smells like fat and lye. Still, you manage to trade for a small bar of soft yellow soap made with tallow and lavender. You use it like it's gold, hiding it under a loose floorboard between washes. You begin to admire the quiet rituals of cleanliness that still persist. Women combing lice from children's hair with iron teeth combs. Men wiping down tools at the end of the day with rags dipped in vinegar and ash. Priests washing their hands before communion. Even in the grime, there's a human urge to clean, to reset, to feel a little less like a walking compost heap. One evening you spot a boy on the corner selling perfume water, essentially scented alcohol in a small vial. You buy it. It smells like crushed rosemary and regret, but you dab it behind your ears and feel slightly more civilized. That night, as you lay in bed under the same rough blanket, you realize something strange. You've gotten used to the smell of the city, the scent of yourself. Not that you like it, but it no longer makes you flinch. Your nose has adapted. It's survival through desensitization. A strange milestone, but a milestone nonetheless. You close your eyes, still vaguely itchy, but knowing at least you tried today. And in the world of 1700s, hygiene, trying, is honestly pretty elite. This morning your stomach reminds you, again, that oatcakes are not a sustainable lifestyle. You've eaten your body weight in barley, sniffed more dubious meat pies than you'd care to admit, and you're still constantly hungry. The problem isn't just the food, it's money. Or, more specifically, the painful lack of it. Welcome to your next challenge in surviving 1700s Edinburgh. Finding a job that doesn't kill you immediately. First, you need to figure out what you can actually do. And remember, in this century your modern skills are practically useless. You can't code, you can't manage spreadsheets, and telling people you curate vibes will get you laughed into the nearest midden heap. What people need here are tangible sweat and blister jobs, trades, labour and services that keep the city from completely falling apart. You head out just after sunrise, when the streets are still wet from mist and the night's chamber pots have mostly finished sloshing downhill. The market is bustling with people already at work. You spot a cooper hammering staves into a barrel, his hands covered in splinters and pride. A group of washerwomen slap laundry against stones while arguing over someone's missing apron. Over near the high street, a chimney sweep, no taller than your ribcage, disappears into a soot-blackened opening with a rope tied around his waist. His assistant, barely older, smokes a clay pipe and spits at your boots. Let's just say options are limited. One of the easiest and most dangerous ways to make money is simple labour. Hauling goods, unloading carts, digging ditches, carrying water. You try your hand at this for a day after spotting a man shouting for help with barrels down at the port. You carry 6, throw up behind the 7th, and pull something in your lower back by the 8th. You're paid a single copper coin and a stale heel of bread. A victory, technically. But you're so sore afterward that you lie on your floorboards and groan like a ghost in need of therapy. You quickly realise you need a longer-term plan, so you start asking around for apprenticeships. That's how most people in trades get started. Years of training under a master in exchange for food, shelter, and being shouted at every 10 minutes. You're a bit old for it, honestly, but you convince a friendly-looking shoemaker to let you help around his workshop. It's cramped, dark, and smells like wet leather and feet. You last 2 days before a misused awl goes through your thumbnail and you pass out cold. Still, it's a start. You learn that trades in Edinburgh are strictly controlled by guilds, official organisations that regulate everything from pricing to who gets to call themselves a craftsman. Bakers, smiths, masons, weavers, they all have guilds. The good news is once you're in one, you're protected. The bad news is getting in requires years of apprenticeship and usually family connections. You have neither, so naturally you look for work in the grey areas. There's always room in the informal economy. You meet a woman named Bess who sells roasted chestnuts and baked potatoes on a corner with an open fire pit. She lets you help for a few hours in exchange for food. It's technically illegal. Open flames on the street are frowned upon by the city council, but Bess pays the right people and no one bothers her. You learn to yell loud, keep the fire hot, and charm customers without being too charming. One of them gets handsy, and Bess chases him off with a ladle and some language that would curdle milk. There's something strangely empowering about this kind of hustle. You're not building a career, you're just trying to stay alive long enough to afford tomorrow's turnip, and in that narrow, grimy lane, you're doing okay. But of course not all jobs are honest jobs. Edinburgh has a thriving underground economy. Thieves, fences, coin clippers, and body snatchers, yes, body snatchers, all make their living off the dead or the desperate. You overhear a conversation about a group called the Resurrection Men, who dig up freshly buried corpses to sell to medical schools. It's disgusting, it's horrifying, and it's very profitable. You consider it. Briefly. Instead, you take a safer route and start delivering messages for a bookseller in the Canongate. It's not glamorous, but it pays a couple of pence per day and gets you access to warm rooms and occasionally free bread. Plus, the job lets you move through the city unnoticed. You get to observe without being observed. A quirky little job you discover in your rounds. Rat catcher. Entirely real. Some people make their living trapping and killing rats, which are everywhere in this city. It's not even uncommon for people to keep ferrets or small dogs solely for the purpose of rat hunting. You watch a wiry man with 3 Jack Russells clear a whole cellar in under an hour. He's the closest thing you've seen to a local hero. Now, there's a scholarly debate that still lingers. How mobile was the 18th century Scottish workforce? Some argue that if you were born poor, you stayed poor. Others claim that with enough grit, and sometimes dumb luck, people could climb the social ladder through hard work or clever marriage. Your experience? Let's call it slow uphill crawling. Every coin is hard-earned, every meal uncertain, but you're making it. One grimy step at a time. The city isn't fair. The wealthy live behind closed doors with full plates and warm beds. You pass them in the street smelling of lavender, their boots polished by servants. They don't even see you. And yet, somehow, that makes you more determined. By the end of the week, you've juggled half a dozen odd jobs. You've mucked stalls for a stable boy too hungover to function, carried hot bricks for a mason, and spent 3 hours helping a woman sort goose feathers by size. You even find a rhythm in it. A strange, filthy rhythm where you know what you're doing and why. And at the end of each long, bone-aching day, you count your coins like they're sacred. You've earned enough for food, a bit of soap, maybe even a new pair of socks if you're feeling reckless. You're not thriving, but you're not starving either. You fall into bed each night smelling like sweat, ash, and faintly of horses, and you sleep hard, not because you're peaceful, but because you're too tired to dream. You've got a job. Kind of. And in this world, that makes you rich. You smell smoke before you even open your eyes. Not the cosy, nostalgic kind that comes from a campfire or a well-tended hearth, but the sharp, panic-inducing kind that smells like wood, grease, and oh no, the building is on fire. You bolt upright, heart hammering, nostrils full of soot. Outside, someone is shouting, loud, urgently. You scramble to the window and peer down into the alley. Flames flicker below. And just like that, you realise the terrifying truth. Fire is one of the most constant and casual threats to your survival in 1700s Edinburgh. Here's the deal. This city is built of stone on the outside, yes, but inside, wood. So much wood. Floors, staircases, furniture, roof beams, bed frames, door frames, all dry and primed like a matchstick cathedral. Add to that the fact that everyone uses open flames for cooking, heating, lighting, and, of course, smoking literal pipes of fire in every tavern, and you've got yourself a fire hazard so extreme it's practically a feature of the landscape. The building across from yours is the one burning. You grab your coat and rush outside. Neighbours are already forming a bucket line from the nearest well. It's not efficient, but it's all they've got. A woman screams something unintelligible from an upper window holding a crying child. There's no fire brigade, not really. There are fire engines, wheeled contraptions pushed by hand and operated by local volunteers, but they take ages to arrive and are often used more to protect property than to save people. You join the line, passing buckets hand to hand, your arms quickly soaked, muscles burning. The water does little. The flames eat hungrily through the tenement's upper floors, sending charred debris fluttering down like burning snowflakes. You spot a man attempting to climb up a drain pipe to reach someone. It bends. He falls. People gasp, but no one stops. Eventually the fire starts to die. Not because of your heroic effort, but because it's consumed everything combustible in its reach. A chimney collapses with a final guttural crack, and everyone flinches. The crowd stands there for a moment, covered in soot and sweat, watching smoke coil up into the sky like a departing spirit. And then, business resumes, just like that. People go back to hauling water, sweeping ash off the street, scolding children who got too close. It's not that they don't care, it's that they're used to this. Fires are as common as rainstorms, just louder and more final. You walk back toward your building in a daze, trying not to imagine what would have happened if the flames had jumped the alley. What if the wind had shifted? What if you hadn't woken up in time? You suddenly understand why people here sleep with their shoes by the door and a chamber pot nearby, not just for convenience, but for survival. A quirky detail you pick up later from an old man at the tavern. The term nightman doesn't just refer to those who clean out the privies. In some tenements, there's an unofficial fire watcher who stays up through the darkest hours, listening for the crackle of flames or the scream of fire shouted from the rooftops. It's a thankless job, unpaid, unseen, but sometimes the only reason people survive until morning. You start paying more attention to your surroundings. The candle on your bedside table, dangerous. The neighbour who smokes his pipe inside his thatched roof room, practically a walking firebomb. You see chimneys spewing sparks, fireplaces left unattended, lanterns hanging from splintery wood beams. It's like living in a tinderbox where everyone's just hoping the wind's in a good mood today. The city council does have fire regulations, technically. There are fines for unsafe chimneys, poorly kept hearths, and buildings too close together, which, spoiler, is every building. But enforcement is spotty. The wealthier districts, what there is of them, might have the luxury of fire breaks and multiple exits. But you live in a stack of kindling held together by hope and damp air. You ask someone about fire insurance, which, surprisingly, exists. A few of the more affluent shopkeepers have little brass plaques nailed above their doors, symbols of early insurance societies that promise to cover damages or pay for rebuilding in case of a blaze. You stare at one of these plaques and realise it's the 1700s version of a security system. Too bad your tenement has no such protection. If it burns down, you're just ash with a name. There's still scholarly debate about how often fires occurred in Edinburgh during this century. Some claim that thanks to the city's tight regulation and abundance of stone, large-scale fires weren't as common as in places like London. Others argue the records are misleading, and that small, deadly fires happened constantly just without fanfare. All you know is, you watched 3 people lose everything today, and no one even wrote it down. The worst part isn't even the destruction, it's the rebuilding. Most tenants don't own their homes. They rent from landlords who might live nowhere near the city. When a building burns, tenants are left to find new lodgings, and landlords often just patch over the damage as cheaply as possible. You pass a scorched tenement wall a few days later, already covered in new plaster, as if the fire never happened. But you remember. You smelled it in your lungs. You felt the heat on your face. Now every time you light a candle, your hands hesitate. Every creak of the building at night sounds like crackling. You develop a habit of sniffing the air when you wake. Paranoid, maybe, but alive. You even keep a bucket of water near your bed, just in case. It won't save you if things go really wrong, but it gives you the illusion of control, which is a hot commodity in this city. Still, life goes on. The bakery down the lane rebuilds its ovens. Children throw stones at a half-burned wall and call it a castle. A girl sells charred wood from the ruins as witch-warding charms for a penny apiece. You buy one, not because you believe in it, but because she looks like she needs the coin, and honestly, you could use a little extra luck. You finish the day at the tavern, clothes still faintly smoky, hands blistered from that cursed bucket line. The room is warm, filled with laughter and the scent of stew, and fire, always fire. You look at the hearth and wonder, how many nights does this place have left? But you say nothing. You just take a sip of ale, breathe in the smoke and let the fear settle somewhere deep inside next to your growing library of survival instincts. Because in this city the fire isn't if, it's when. You've managed to not die in a fire, not starve and not succumb to whatever was living in your mattress. But now you're facing a different kind of threat. One that's less immediate, but just as dangerous if you get it wrong. The invisible social hierarchy of 1700s Edinburgh. You're about to learn that in this city, how you behave, how you speak, stand, dress, and even where you walk, can determine whether people see you as a respectable citizen or just another rat in a waistcoat. At first glance, everyone seems equally grimy, cold, and annoyed, but it doesn't take long to see the rules under the surface. Edinburgh is a city that runs on status, rigid, inherited, enforced by both law and dirty looks. It doesn't matter if you're clever, charming, or secretly from the future. If you don't look like you belong in a certain tier, you're not getting in. Let's break it down. At the top, you've got the gentry, landed elites with country estates and enough powdered wigs to wallpaper a room. Then come the merchants and professionals, lawyers, doctors, successful tradespeople. Below that are the artisans, apprentices, servants and labourers. And under them is everyone else, the poor, the unemployed, the beggars, the criminals, and the tragically invisible. You, right now, are somewhere near the bottom middle. You've got a coat without holes, shoes that mostly match, and you haven't been arrested yet. That makes you better off than a good chunk of the city. But one wrong step, one poorly timed comment or misplaced eye roll at the wrong powdered judge, and you could find yourself socially exiled, or worse, physically punished. You test the waters early one morning by walking down the Royal Mile with your head a little too high. Big mistake. A pair of well-dressed gentlemen glance your way and immediately look offended, like you just insulted their family tree. You lower your eyes and step aside. They nod as they pass, barely noticing you. That's the correct way to interact with power here. Submission with a side of silence. Later that day, you try to sit on a bench outside St. Giles Cathedral. A woman in an embroidered shawl gives you a look that could curdle milk. That's not for the likes of you, she says. Not unkindly, just firmly. You move without argument. You're learning. In this society, everything is permission-based. You don't just enter a room, you wait to be let in. You don't speak unless spoken to. And if you're dealing with someone even slightly above your station, your vocabulary suddenly shrinks. You I, you nay, and you do a lot of deferential nodding. It's like social charades, and the stakes are high. Here's something fun. Manners are class-specific. What's polite among fishmongers might be vulgar in a solicitor's parlour. What's casual to an artisan could be scandalous to a merchant's wife. You quickly learn to mirror whoever you're talking to like a social chameleon. It's exhausting but vital. You spend half your time talking and the other half decoding the body language of people with better shoes than you. One afternoon you get invited, sort of, into a gentleman's club on Princes Street. You're delivering a message, but the doorman mistakes you for someone else. You seize the moment, step inside, and immediately feel like a goat at a fox convention. The room smells like tobacco, brandy, and slow judgment. You keep your mouth shut, nod at everything, and escape 10 minutes later with your dignity mostly intact. Back in Old Town, though, it's a different game. The social rules here are grittier, less polished, but just as strict. Among labourers, you need confidence, fast hands, and a sharp tongue. Too quiet, and people think you're weak. Too loud, and someone might take it personally. You develop a carefully crafted persona. Humble, mildly sarcastic, and just a little odd. Odd enough that people avoid asking too many questions. A quirky fact you pick up from an old gossip near the market. There's an entire etiquette around stairs. In multi-storey tenements, the wealthier tenants live on the lower levels. Fewer stairs, less filth. If you're heading up and you meet someone coming down, you move aside, always. Failing to do so might earn you a slap or worse, a formal complaint to the building's owner, who might throw you out just to avoid conflict. You test this once, you don't move. The other person, a plump woman in a velvet bonnet, whacks you with her basket. Lesson learned. There's ongoing scholarly debate about how rigid class mobility really was in 18th century Edinburgh. Some historians argue that Enlightenment ideals and urban growth allowed for upward movement. Education, clever marriages, or successful businesses could help someone climb. Others believe the hierarchy was self-reinforcing, and the majority of people died roughly where they were born. After living here for a while, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in the middle. There's hope, but it's expensive and unpredictable. You also start to notice the role of language. Scots dialects, English accents, Latin phrases in legal settings. It's a minefield of pronunciation and implication. Say the wrong thing in the wrong voice, and people peg you immediately. You learn to code switch. Thick Scots brogue when you're buying turnips, clipped Queen's English, badly faked, when talking to authority figures, silence when you're out of your depth. You don't just survive the week, you start to game the system. You figure out who to flatter, who to ignore, and who will share their ale if you make them laugh. You practice making your bow just deep enough to show respect, but not so deep that it looks desperate. You begin to build what little social capital you can, one conversation at a time, and yet you're always on edge, always calculating, because here your status can vanish with a single misstep. All it takes is a scuffle, a scandal, or an unpaid debt, and suddenly you're not that clever young man with the nice coat. You're that thief, that troublemaker, that outsider. You watch it happen to others. One day, they're part of the city's rhythm. The next, they're sleeping in doorways and begging for scraps. You go to bed that night grateful for your tiny room and your chipped wooden chair. Grateful you've learned the invisible rules, at least enough to avoid disaster. You're not rising fast, but you're not falling either. And in 1700s Edinburgh, that counts as winning. You're not a criminal. At least you don't think you are. But in 1700s Edinburgh, that's not entirely up to you. The legal system here operates on a complex mixture of actual law, local gossip, social standing, and whatever mood the town bailey happens to be in that day. One poorly timed comment, one accusation, one debt unpaid, and you could find yourself standing in the middle of the toll booth, trying to convince a powdered wig that you're not guilty of treason, theft, or being generally suspicious looking in public. It all starts with a broken window. You're walking through the cannon gate late in the afternoon, minding your own business, when a stone, thrown by a couple of grinning kids chasing each other, ricochets off a wall and crashes through a shop window. Glass shatters. The kids vanish into the nearest alley like cockroaches, and you, standing there in the wrong place at the wrong time, are suddenly very interesting to the two city guards loitering nearby. You don't even have time to explain before one of them grabs you by the arm and hauls you toward the toll booth, a grim medieval hulk of a building that serves as courthouse, jail, and city administration hub, all rolled into one charming tower of misery. As they drag you along, you realise something important. You're about to get your first real taste of justice, 1700s style. The toll booth smells like damp stone and centuries of fear. You're shoved into a holding room with a few other unlucky souls, drunks, petty thieves, and one man who looks far too calm to be innocent. No one speaks much, everyone stares straight ahead. You sit there for what feels like hours, watching candlelight flicker across the walls and listening to the distant clang of iron doors being opened and shut. Eventually you're brought before the magistrate, an older man with a face like a dried apple and a wig so large it looks like it might tip him backward. He eyes you over his spectacles, clearly unimpressed. "A foreigner, eh?" he mutters. You start to explain, calmly, clearly, slowly, and to your surprise he listens. It helps that the shop owner shows up, takes one look at you, and confirms you weren't the one who threw the stone. You're released with a warning and a disgusted wave of the hand. You walk out of the toll booth with your heart pounding and a new understanding. You can be arrested just for being nearby. That's not an exaggeration. In this city, you can be charged with vagrancy if you don't have visible means of income. You can be jailed for debt, even if you're only behind by a few shillings. You can be punished for blasphemy, profanity, or lewd conduct, which might just mean dancing too enthusiastically at the wrong gathering. And if someone from a higher class accuses you of something, anything, you'd better have witnesses, or you're in for a rough ride. You spend the next few days learning how crime and punishment actually work here, starting with the basics. Public shaming is huge. Stocks and pillories are scattered across town, and people are regularly locked into them for hours, or days, while passers-by are encouraged to throw things. Mud, spoiled vegetables, insults, the occasional small rock. It's community-based cruelty at its most efficient. You see a woman locked in the Tron for selling bread with short weight, meaning she shaved off a few ounces to make more profit. She stands there in the cold while children laugh and someone smears something unidentifiable on her apron. The law's been satisfied, sort of. And then there's the darker side. Real punishments. Executions, for example, are very public. The grass market, where you've eaten soup and bought turnips, doubles as the city's execution square. You pass by one morning and see the scaffold being set up for a hanging. It's treated like a grim holiday. People gathering early, bringing snacks, getting good spots. Children are lifted onto shoulders. Vendors sell hot drinks. You watch from a distance, stomach turning. A man is led up in chains, flanked by ministers and guards. His crime, horse theft. He says a prayer, stands on the platform, and then nothing poetic. Just a rope, a fall, and silence. The crowd erupts into noise, but you turn away. It's not entertainment to you, not yet anyway. There's a quirky historical twist to all this. The executioner is also a pariah. No one wants to live near him, marry him, or even speak to him if they can help it. He's paid well, but forced to live outside polite society, often in the outskirts or even in the jail itself. Some say they go mad from the isolation, others say they were mad to begin with. You spend one afternoon talking to a watchman, Older, missing half his teeth, but friendly enough. He tells you about the different prisons in the city. The toll booth, the Canongate toll booth, the old jail and others. Some attached to churches, some buried beneath civic buildings. They're not designed for rehabilitation. They're dark, wet, overcrowded, and disease-ridden. If you go in, you'd better have someone on the outside with coin, or you might not come out at all. Scholars still debate how fair the Scottish legal system was during this period. Some claim it was surprisingly advanced. There were formal procedures, written laws, and early ideas about legal defence. Others argue that for the poor it was all theatre. Rich men could hire lawyers and buy their way out of trouble. Everyone else? They were at the mercy of circumstance, class, and the capriciousness of the court. You lean toward the latter. Back in your tenement, you now make a point of keeping your head down in public. You avoid street arguments. You steer clear of crowds unless you're sure it's just a market and not an angry mob. You stop talking to constables altogether unless directly addressed. Your motto becomes, be invisible, stay alive. That night you can't sleep. You lie awake thinking of the man on the scaffold, the woman in the Tron, the smell of old stone and cold iron inside the toll booth. The city's justice is like the weather, unpredictable, punishing, and no respecter of persons. You survived your brush with it. Barely. But you know better now. You're not a criminal, but you're very, very careful not to look like one. The church bell rings at 6 in the morning, and it doesn't care that you didn't sleep. It doesn't care that your bones ache, that you've barely digested last night's oatcake, or that your blanket smells like a wet dog and an old boot had a baby. The bell insists. It's Sunday, and that means one thing. No matter your health, your mood, or your spiritual leanings, you're going to church. You try to fake sleep at first. Just lie there and pretend the sound isn't happening. But soon the hallway's full of the thunderous stomp of boots and the polite but pointed knocking of Mrs. Kemp, your terrifying landlady. You'll be at service, or I'll not have your rent next week, she growls through the door, her tone leaving no room for interpretation. You groan, drag yourself up, and start pulling on your itchiest shirt, the one without a collar, which already makes you a bit suspect. Religion in 1700s. Edinburgh isn't optional. It's not just a place to worship. It's the spine of the city, the thread sewn through daily life, politics, family, work, and even your leisure. Everyone watches who goes to church, who doesn't, and who dares to doze off mid-sermon. Missing Sunday service isn't just frowned upon, it's evidence of a moral failing, maybe even a legal one. You join the stream of grim-faced citizens heading towards St Giles Cathedral, the towering heart of Edinburgh's spiritual life. The streets are quieter than usual, but not peaceful. There's a certain tension, a collective awareness that today is about showing face and showing submission. You see people dressed in their best, which still means rough wool and worn shoes, but with cleaner neckcloths and better posture. Children trail behind parents, whispering and nudging each other until a scolding glare freezes them in place. Inside the cathedral the air is cold and damp. The scent of candle wax and unwashed humanity hangs low. You find a spot near the back, where the poorer folk gather. There's no real seating for people like you, just stone slabs and a few rough benches. The wealthier citizens, of course, have their own pews, carved, labelled and fiercely guarded, like VIP sections for piety. The minister enters, tall and severe, his robes swinging with each step. The moment he begins to speak, the air tightens. The sermon is not light, it's not warm. There is no cosy, love thy neighbour, or gentle discussion of grace. This is a Presbyterian sermon in its purest form. Fire, brimstone, and the ever-present possibility of your damnation. You try to follow along, but it's a challenge. The minister speaks in dense, winding sentences, layered with Latin, scripture, and metaphors that feel more like threats than teachings. Every few minutes you catch a phrase, unrepentant hearts, the sulphur pit, God's wrath made manifest, and shift uncomfortably on your bench. Everyone around you is locked in place, eyes forward, faces grim. No one dares fidget. A woman coughs once and is met with 3 dirty looks and a sideways glance from the deacon. Children who talk are removed, sometimes carried out by the ear, and adults who doze are later fined or shamed publicly. You, of course, sit up straighter than you've ever sat in your life. Here's something weird you find out later. The sermons can go on for 2 or 3 hours. There are no breaks, no music, no soft introductions or light-hearted parables. It's all judgment and endurance, and you're not even halfway through when your legs start to go numb. There's a fringe tradition here called the cutty stool, a low wooden seat where sinners are made to sit publicly during service for their crimes, usually moral failings like fornication or drunkenness. It's not in use today, but you see the stool near the pulpit, just sitting there, waiting. You imagine the horror of being called forward, having your sin shouted aloud, and sitting there while the entire congregation stares at you for an hour and a half. That's the 1700s version of a viral scandal. After the service, eventually, mercifully, you file out with the rest of the sheep, trying not to trip on your half-frozen feet. The mood outside is hushed, not joyful. No one talks about the sermon. No one dares critique it. You simply nod to your neighbours and return home in silence, spiritually spooked and physically exhausted. The church doesn't stop at Sunday either. It's in everything. There are weekly catechisms for children, marriage bans that must be read aloud for 3 consecutive Sundays, and regular visits from kirk officials who inspect the moral health of each household. That's right, random inspections. You might be asked how often you pray, whether you've read your Bible, or if you've been seen loitering near a tavern too frequently. The church elders, usually men with powerful scowls and an aggressive relationship with righteousness, are basically religious landlords. They're in your business constantly. Gossip, especially the sinful kind, can result in fines, forced public confessions, or even temporary exile. You hear of a woman last week who was made to stand barefoot in the cold for excessive laughter and familiarity with a man not her husband. Excessive laughter. Let that one sit with you. Scholars often debate whether the rigid moral code of Scottish Presbyterianism helped or hurt society during this era. Some argue it kept the city orderly, educated and God-fearing. Others say it crushed individuality, fueled misogyny, and weaponized shame as a tool of control. You've been here long enough now to see both sides. There's a quiet dignity in the way people hold themselves, yes, but also a constant undercurrent of fear, especially for women, the poor, or anyone who deviates even slightly from the accepted norm. You try to keep your head down. You nod during sermons, you mutter amen when appropriate. You avoid the taverns on Sundays and pretend to read the Bible you borrowed from your neighbour. But even then, you never quite feel safe, because one wrong whisper, one moral misstep, and the church will come knocking, with questions and punishments. That night you go to bed early, the sound of that morning's sermon still rattling in your head. You dream of thunder, of fire, of a giant finger pointing at you while the whole congregation watches. You wake up sweating and cross yourself instinctively, just in case someone's watching. In the 1700s Edinburgh, it's not enough to behave. You must appear righteous, always, and pray, fervently, that no one decides to test how righteous you really are. You didn't think darkness could feel this thick, but here it is, pressed against your face, curling in the corners, seeping into your clothes. The sun's been down for hours, and you've never been more aware of the fact that there is no electricity. No gentle glow from a street lamp, no headlights bouncing off stone walls, not even the pathetic flicker of a modern flashlight. Just blackness, like the city has been swallowed whole, and you're still walking around in its stomach. You step outside cautiously, one hand trailing along the cold stone wall of your tenement. The street is barely visible. There are lamps, yes, but they're few and far between. Oil-fed or tallow-fed little cages of weak light, and they're not exactly city-maintained. Most are private or paid for by wealthier neighbours, flickering weakly outside shop fronts or upper-floor windows. Some have already gone out for the night, snuffed to save on oil. You've learned quickly that in Edinburgh, night isn't a time, it's a mood. The first thing you notice after the absence of vision is the sound. It's not silent out here, it's never silent. The city at night breathes differently, raspier, more deliberate. You hear boots on stone, a distant cough, a bottle breaking somewhere out of sight, and the sharp cry of some poor soul who's either very drunk or very stabbed. It's hard to tell in the dark. And just like that, the second truth of nighttime in the 1700s hits you. It's not safe. Even if you've spent the whole day being invisible and cautious, all bets are off after sunset. The streets belong to thieves, drunkards, vagrants, stray dogs, and the occasional group of city guards who are either too tired or too corrupt to care what's happening around them. If something goes wrong, if someone attacks you, mugs you, drags you down a close and disappears, you scream, and maybe someone hears, but probably they don't help. Not because they're heartless, just because helping can be dangerous too. You grip the hilt of the tiny eating knife you've started carrying tucked into your coat. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. You keep your pace steady, your eyes squinting through the dark, your ears doing most of the work. If the city in daylight is a loud market full of rules and judgment, then the city at night is a whispered secret, and you are absolutely not supposed to be eavesdropping. Your mission tonight is a short one, delivering a message to the back door of a printer's shop near Cowgate. Nothing dramatic. But the moment you step off the better-lit Royal Mile and down into the sloping winds and closes, you feel like you've entered another world. The buildings lean in even closer down here, like they're trying to hide the sky. Windows are shuttered, doors barred, and the only thing still moving are the rats and you. You pass a drunk slumped against a wall, muttering to himself in a slurry mix of Scots and misery. He doesn't even look at you. Further down you hear footsteps and duck into a doorway, holding your breath as a pair of shadowy figures pass. You don't know who they are, and you're not about to ask. Here's a curious truth. Most serious crime in 1700s, Edinburgh doesn't happen during elaborate heists or daytime riots. It happens quietly, under cover of night. Robberies, assaults, smuggling, illegal gambling, even murders. They're all easier to get away with when half the city's asleep and the other half can't see you. You finally reach the back of the printer's shop and tap twice on the door just like you were told. A man cracks it open, eyes you warily, and then snatches the note from your hand without a word. The door closes. That's it. Your job is done. Now you just have to get home alive. The return trip feels longer, more uncertain. You take a wrong turn and wind up in a close so narrow you can touch both sides with your elbows. It smells like fish and rotting turnips. You hurry through, and when you emerge, someone, grabs your arm. It's a boy, maybe 12, eyes hollow, teeth missing. "Coin?" he asks, voice raspy. You shake your head. He doesn't let go. Then a second figure steps out behind him. Older, not friendly. You back up instinctively, hand going to your knife, but before anything worse can happen, a door creaks open above and a woman's voice barks something unintelligible. The figures scatter. You run. When you reach your tenement, lungs burning, you stand in the stairwell for a long moment before daring to go inside, your hands shaking, not from cold, from how close that felt, how suddenly the line between doing fine and bleeding out in the gutter can vanish when the sun does. Back in your room, you bolt the door and light a single tallow candle. It sputters to life, casting flickering shadows across the walls. It's not much, but it's something. Light is power here, protection, even if it smells like burned sheep fat. Here's a quirky fact. Some households hang garlic over their doors at night, not for flavour, but for warding off spirits. Others mark chalk crosses on the hearth, or turn mirrors to the wall to avoid inviting the devil in. You used to roll your eyes at superstition. Now, you're considering buying a string of garlic from the woman in the market who smells like goats and moonlight. Scholars still debate how lawless the streets truly were after dark in cities like Edinburgh. Some claim the fear was overblown, that most citizens were simply cautious, not in constant peril. Others point to records of night watch logs, criminal reports, and the rise of vigilante groups as proof that the danger was real and widespread. Based on your short expedition tonight, you'd place your bets firmly in the danger is real camp. As you settle into bed, candle still flickering on the table beside you, you try not to think about the faces you saw in the dark, or the ones you didn't see. You try not to remember the feel of the boy's fingers wrapped around your coat. You stare at the ceiling and wonder how long it'll take before you start to see the night as normal. Just another part of life, like the smell of the gutters or the groan of your upstairs neighbour's joints. But for now, it's still terrifying, and beautiful, in a strange, awful way. A city stripped bare of judgment and law, where only instincts matter, where every step could be your last, and the stars, when they're not hiding behind smoke and fog, shine down like distant, indifferent eyes. You fall asleep clutching your knife, just in case. The wall is thin, too thin. You've known that since your first night in the tenement, but tonight really drives it home. You're lying on your straw mattress, blanket pulled up to your ears, and yet you might as well be in the same room with the couple 2 doors down, arguing about something involving a missing bonnet, a borrowed comb, and what sounds like a very public insult outside the fish stall. You know all of this because they're shouting at full volume, and the walls made of uneven stone, and years of regret offer no privacy whatsoever. Welcome to tenement living Edinburgh style. You thought it might be quaint. You thought wrong. Living in a tenement in the 1700s isn't just about sharing walls, it's about sharing everything. Sound, smell, space, and occasionally secrets. You don't just hear your neighbours, you know when they snore, when they're cooking cabbage, and when they haven't bathed in a week, which, let's be honest, is most of the time. There is no such thing as alone here. Not really. You start your morning not with a stretch and a yawn, but with the rhythmic thumping of someone sweeping the stairwell outside your door. That would be old Mrs. Kerr from the flat above. She does this every other morning, and not for hygiene. Oh no. She does it because it's her territory, and the act of sweeping loudly at 5:30 a.m. is her way of reminding everyone she's still in charge of the stair. This is a very real, very serious tenement dynamic. The stairwell hierarchy. You grunt and roll over, trying to catch a few more minutes of sleep, but now the baby downstairs is awake, again, and has decided to cry with the force of a banshee being exorcised. You try stuffing wool in your ears. It only makes things worse by muffling the sound just enough to make it weirdly eerie. So instead, you get up and face the day like everyone else in this sardine can city block. You pass neighbours on the stairs and exchange polite grunts. Actual conversation is rare unless it's absolutely necessary. Too much talking, and people start to assume you're up to something. Too little, and they'll assume the same. It's a tightrope walk between politeness and suspicion. Most people manage it by just being vaguely annoyed at all times, which is a very acceptable form of socialising in Edinburgh. The hallway smells like boiled onions, wet boots, and something you don't want to identify. There's a leak somewhere, probably in the roof above the attic, and it's found its way down 3 floors to where you live. You tell Mrs. Kemp, your landlord, and she stares at you like you've just complained about the colour of the sky. Then catch the drip in a pail, she says. Simple enough. You do. Later, as you walk through the building, you notice the intricate system of rules everyone seems to follow without ever having written them down. Don't knock after dark unless there's a fire. Don't borrow salt without returning it the same day. Don't walk too loudly. Don't make eye contact with Mr. Dalrymple after he's had his evening dram, unless you want to hear a 10-minute rant about how the king ruined his cousin's career in the customs office. You also learn that neighbours share more than space. They share information. Gossip travels faster in this building than a rat in a bakery. If someone in the top flat sneezes too loud, the people at the bottom know about it before lunch. Affairs, debts, illnesses, new jobs, unexpected visitors. It all gets absorbed by the building and whispered back out through door cracks and under windowsills. Privacy is not a thing here. It's a joke everyone's in on. Still, there's a kind of strange comfort to it. When your firewood runs out, Mrs. Kerr offers you some of hers without blinking. When a merchant shortchanges you in the market, your neighbour's son, who may or may not be part of a street gang, wordlessly drops the correct amount into your hand the next day. No explanation. Just justice. It's not community in the warm, fuzzy sense. It's survival-based cooperation. But it works. You're also starting to understand why so many historical records describe tenement life as both chaotic and close-knit. Scholars still argue whether tenements were miserable, dehumanising boxes of filth, or the early prototypes of urban community life. The answer, as you've now seen firsthand, is both. You live on top of each other, breathing the same air, hearing the same heartbreaks, sharing the same splintery stairs. You're exhausted and irritated and constantly aware of your own bodily sounds. But you also know that if something goes wrong, a fire, a sickness, a constable with too many questions, these people will look out for you. Even if they won't look you directly in the eye, a quirky moment hits you on a rainy afternoon. The gutters are overflowing, and the front entrance to your building is flooded. Rather than complain, everyone just rolls up their breeches and trudges through. One man pulls out a fiddle and plays a jig in the ankle-deep water. 2 kids dance. Someone tosses a fish into the puddle and declares it a swimming lesson. It's absurd. It's loud. It smells like wet dog and joy. And for just a minute you laugh out loud and nobody stares at you for it. That night, though, things take a turn. A fight breaks out on the floor above. You hear it through the ceiling. Shouts, a crash, someone crying. You stay quiet. This is another rule. If it sounds dangerous, you mind your own business. Eventually the noise stops. You hear the slow creak of someone moving down the stairs, and then silence. You lie there, frozen, wondering what just happened, and if it's really over. No one speaks of it the next day. Life simply continues. You go on like this for weeks, waking up to other people's noise, cooking when there's space, sleeping with one ear open, trading gossip for favours and favours for peace and quiet. And gradually the chaos becomes familiar. The constant noise, the smells, the damp. It becomes the price of your new normal. You still get annoyed, still swear under your breath when someone dumps slop in the alley outside your window, still flinch when Mr. Dalrymple's voice echoes off the stone like a trumpet of doom. But you also notice how the building breathes with you now. It creaks when the weather changes. It knows your footsteps. It doesn't feel like home exactly, but it no longer feels foreign. And so, when the couple down the hall starts arguing again that night, same voices, same insults, same complaints, you don't sigh, or cover your ears, or bang on the wall like you used to. You just roll over, mutter, "Not the bonnet again," and fall asleep like someone who finally belongs. You knew winter would be rough. Everyone warned you. The winds off the Firth of Forth, the long nights, the way the cold slips through every crack in the stone and curls itself around your spine. But none of that prepares you for the reality of an 18th century Edinburgh winter. There are cold days, and then there are days when your breath turns to mist indoors, and the frost on your window grows inward. Days when your chamber pot threatens to freeze solid before sunrise. Days when you honestly start to wonder if your toes are still attached. Welcome to the season of trying not to freeze to death in your flat. You wake up with your face half buried in the scratchy wool of your blanket, nose burning from the chill. The fire's gone out, again, and you can see your breath puffing in little clouds as you exhale. The floor is icy stone, and even your clothes left in a heap beside the bed are cold to the touch. You dress like you're preparing for war. 3 layers, 4 if you count the spare shirt you tie around your waist like an impromptu girdle. Still, you can't feel your knees. The tenement is quieter in winter. People move slower, talk less, conserve energy like their bodies are candle wicks that might burn out too fast. The stairwell smells of damp wool, coal smoke, and stale air. You pass neighbours bundled in shawls and cloaks, each one of them looking like a half-frozen ghost. Children huddle in corners, hands wrapped around mugs of thin broth or tea that probably came from the same leaves boiled 3 times over. Fuel is precious now. You've learned to ration your firewood like a miser. 1 log in the morning, 2 at night, maybe an extra splintered board if you're feeling reckless. Coal is expensive. Too expensive for most tenants, and the good stuff is saved for the rich or stolen by those bold enough to smuggle it. You've tried burning anything. Scraps of fabric, old paper, even part of a broken chair leg. It stinks, but it's heat. Outside, the streets are an icy gauntlet. The steep slope of the Royal Mile becomes a death trap under snow, and the closes and winds turn slick with frozen runoff. You see people fall every day. A woman lands hard on her hip near St Mary's Wynd. She's helped up, dusted off, and limps away like it's just another Tuesday, which for her it is. Your boots, which barely survived autumn, are no match for this. You try wrapping your feet in rags inside your shoes, but they stay soaked. You hear of a man who lost 2 toes last year to frostbite. No one makes a big deal of it. He just walks a little differently now. You spend your afternoon seeking warmth wherever you can. The bakehouse lets you loiter near the ovens if you help sweep. The print shop near the cowgate always has a kettle going. Sometimes you linger too long in the church vestibule just to absorb a bit of the trapped heat radiating off stone walls warmed by candlelight and congregational breath. A fringe detail you learn over mulled ale one evening. In some tenements, it's common for entire families, or groups of tenants, to sleep huddled together in the same bed during winter. It's not weird, it's survival. Heat is communal. You haven't reached that level yet, but you're starting to understand the logic. One night, your upstairs neighbour's dog sneaks into your room through a cracked door and curls up on your feet. You don't shoo it away. You name it Furnace. Even bathing, already suspicious during the warmer months, becomes almost unthinkable. Washing means removing clothes, and removing clothes means dying a cold, wet death. People settle for wiping their faces with damp cloths, and praying their neighbours are equally lenient on body odour. You've stopped noticing the smell, which is either good news or very bad news. There's an ongoing debate among scholars about how people managed winter in early modern Scotland without freezing en masse. Some argue the stone construction of Edinburgh's buildings helped insulate. Others point to communal heating practices and layered clothing as key. A few suggest people were just tougher back then, having grown up in the cold, raised on oats and spite. You, however, know the truth. They were all just very good at pretending they weren't cold. Night is the worst. The dark stretches for what feels like days. You try to keep a candle burning, not just for light, but for the illusion of warmth. You sleep in every piece of clothing you own, a woolen cocoon of scratchy fabric and desperate prayers. The wind howls through the tiny cracks in your window frame like it's trying to break in and lecture you about your life choices. Sometimes you hear creaking outside, wood, footsteps, maybe rats, and your mind wanders to all the things that could go wrong. What if your fire goes out completely? What if the chimney blocks and smoke fills the room? What if the roof collapses under snow? These are real risks. People die of exposure inside their own homes, and it rarely makes the news. Just another tenant, found stiff and blue in the morning, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't thick enough. You start stockpiling anything that might help. Scraps of cloth, extra food, bits of string, a spare candle end. You become a sort of squirrel person, hoarding warmth and calories like someone expecting a siege, which in a way you are, and yet there are moments, tiny ones, like when a neighbour invites you to share stew over a fire that's actually roaring, or when the old woman on the floor above you passes down a hand-knitted scarf with the gruff explanation that it was too ugly for her son. You don't ask questions, you wear it like it's made of gold. One evening snow starts to fall, soft, steady, unhurried. The city, muffled and hushed, feels strangely peaceful. You stand at your window and watch it settle on the rooftops, glowing faintly under the moon. For a moment it's almost beautiful. Then the wind changes and you shut the window fast. You go to bed that night in full armour, wool socks, scarf, gloves, your coat buttoned to the throat. The candle sputters and goes out. You pull the blanket up to your nose and try not to think about your frozen breath fogging up the darkness. Spring is a distant fantasy, but for now, you're still here, still breathing, still not frozen. That, in this city, is a triumph. There are moments in life when you miss modern plumbing so much it physically hurts, like genuinely, in your stomach, soul-wrenching longing. And in 1700s Edinburgh, that feeling arrives fast and often. Because eventually, no matter how cleverly you've rationed your stew, how carefully you've balanced your diet of turnips, porridge and suspicious pies, you reach the inevitable point where your body looks at you and says, "Okay, time to find a place to pee," and that's when the real suffering begins. First off, let's be clear, there are no bathrooms. Not in the way you're used to. Not even in the way Victorians were used to. The concept of a private indoor toilet. That's science fiction in this city. You've got two choices, chamber pot or street, and most people use both, often in that exact order. Your room in the tenement comes with what passes for a chamber pot. A squat, cracked ceramic bowl that may once have had a floral pattern, now just a faded blur beneath a crust of mineral deposits. You stare at it for a long time the first night you realise you need it. There is no seat, no water, no privacy. You could walk all the way downstairs and out into the alley, but it's freezing, and the idea of fumbling around in the pitch dark with your pants around your ankles seems like a death sentence. So, you go in the pot, and then, with grim determination, you place the lid on and shove it under your bed like a dirty little secret. And this, you learn, is completely normal. Every room in the building has one. Some families share a single pot. Some people don't even bother with pots. They just find a corner in the stairwell and let it fly. You start noticing little puddles on the stone steps at odd times of day. You never step over them anymore. You step around them, carefully. Now comes the fun part, disposal. In theory, you're supposed to empty your chamber pot in the morning. Out a window, yes, but only after shouting the traditional warning, "Gardyloo," as loud as you can. That gives anyone below time to scatter before the contents of your pot come cascading down into the street like the world's worst waterfall. In practice, some people don't shout. Some people shout and dump anyway. Some people forget. Others just don't care. And so the streets of Edinburgh are a minefield of filth, especially before breakfast. You become paranoid about walking near buildings in the morning. You stick to the middle of the road, dodging carts and horses, rather than risk a surprise downpour of human waste. You once see a man get splashed directly on the head. He doesn't even scream. He just closes his eyes and sighs. That's how far down the hygiene ladder this city has fallen. Public facilities? Barely a thing. There are necessaries, public latrine spots, but they're few, filthy, and extremely unsafe after dark. You visit one once, out of desperation. It's a narrow alley with a trough dug into the ground and a stench that makes your eyes water before you even get close. You take care of business as fast as humanly possible, then vow to never return. You feel like you aged 3 years in there. For women, the situation is even worse. Modesty rules mean most don't use public areas at all, and chamber pots are emptied by tossing them into nearby gutters or alleyways, often in the middle of the night. The phrase night soil starts to mean something very real to you. Not just a historical curiosity, but a daily hazard. You learn to wear a hat with a brim. You learn to listen carefully to windows creaking open above. You learn to run. A quirky fact you pick up from an old cooper while hiding from the rain. There were entire jobs devoted to waste removal. The scavengers, or night men, came around in the early hours to collect waste from cesspits and transport it out of the city. The work was poorly paid, physically brutal, and socially reviled. These men were invisible during the day, but they kept the whole city from turning into a literal swamp. You never meet one, but you smell their cart passing once, an odour that punches through your clothes and stays with you for hours. Scholars debate how sanitary Edinburgh actually was during this time. Some argue the city's natural drainage, perched on hills with sloping roads, helped flush away filth better than other European cities. Others point out the constant outbreaks of cholera, typhoid and dysentery as clear evidence that the system, such as it was, did not work. From your perspective, the place runs on rot and routine. The illusion of order barely masks the daily river of human waste flowing underfoot. Even indoors, the smell is never fully gone. The chamber pot, even emptied and rinsed, lingers. The tenement stairwell always carries a faint whiff of ammonia, and you've learned to identify the telltale tang of old urine that's dried into stone. It's not gross anymore, it's just there. But the worst, truly the worst, is when you're out in public and it hits you. That kind of urgency. There are no cafes to duck into, no discreet alleyways that aren't already claimed by someone doing exactly what you're trying to avoid. You develop a sixth sense for which doors are unlocked, which corners offer enough privacy, and which buildings might have a sympathetic tenant who'll let you use their bucket in exchange for a favour or a few pence. One time you nearly pee your breeches while stuck in a crowd near the market. You do a desperate dance between carts until you find a half-collapsed shed and make your move, heart pounding. Someone sees you, of course, a small boy. He shrugs, then joins you, a silent pact of mutual survival. At some point your standards fall off a cliff. You begin to measure success not in cleanliness or comfort, but in proximity and speed. If you can reach your pot in time and not spill it while emptying it, that's a good day. If no one gets hit, even better. If you don't get hit, that's a miracle. You don't talk about any of this with people from the upper floors. The wealthier tenants have private closets, basically indoor wooden cabinets with a hole and a small barrel underneath. It's still gross, still primitive, but it feels civilized compared to your situation. You hear rumours of newer homes in the new town being built with actual water closets, flush toilets, connected to underground drains. You dream about them like a child dreams of dragons or ships to distant lands. One evening you pass a public notice about new regulations on waste disposal. It's optimistic, stern, and utterly useless. People will still shout Gardyloo and still dump their pots out the window. The streets will still reek, and you, humble time-stranded soul that you are, will still tiptoe through Edinburgh with your head up, your ears sharp, and your chamber pot tucked under your bed like a secret weapon. Because in this city, managing your business isn't just survival, it's strategy. There's a chill in the air, not the ordinary kind that seeps through stone walls and bites at your ankles, but something colder, older. You feel it as you walk through the closes after dusk, a tingling along your spine that no wool cloak can chase away. The locals feel it too. They whisper just a little softer tonight, cast glances over their shoulders, mutter things under their breath that sound like half prayers. You don't know it yet, but you're about to get a crash course in something Edinburgh isn't quite ready to let go of in the 1700s. Witch hunts and weird superstitions. Technically, the major witch trials in Scotland have ended. The last legal execution for witchcraft happened back in 1727, a woman named Janet Horn, in a town far to the north. She was burned. Her daughter, accused alongside her, was spared. The case was shaky, like most witch trials, based more on local hysteria than anything resembling proof. And still, it was carried out, not in the distant medieval past, but right around the time you arrived. So, yes, The witch hunting era is mostly over, but the fear, the superstition, the suspicion, oh, it's still thick in the air like chimney smoke. You first encounter it on a rainy morning near the market, when a woman selling herbs gets into a shouting match with another vendor over stolen customers. The word witch is hissed, not screamed, but it hits like a slap. Heads turn. The accused woman, old, hunched, with hands stained green from years of foraging, snaps back in a voice hoarse with fury. But you see the fear in her eyes. You ask someone nearby what just happened. They shake their head and mutter, "Shouldn't call her that, not even in jest. You'll bring it down on all of us." Bring what down? You start to notice little things after that. Tiny bundles of herbs tied with twine left above doorways. Strange symbols scratched into wooden lintels. Bits of wool, feathers, bones, carefully placed, deliberately arranged. Protective charms, some say. Wards against the evil eye, others explain. It's everywhere once you start looking. Beneath all the Enlightenment rationalism and legal reforms, Edinburgh is still a city that fears what it can't see, and what it thinks it sees in its neighbours. You hear stories, always from someone who heard it from someone else. A milk cow gave sour milk 3 days in a row. Must be a curse. A child caught a fever and spoke in tongues. Clearly bewitched. A man had nightmares every night for a week and woke with scratches on his back. Obviously a succubus. None of it is official. None of it is written down. But it lives in the whispers, in the side glances, in the slow way people step around the woman with the cloudy eye who never goes to church. There's a scholarly debate about how deeply these superstitions remained entrenched in Scotland during the 18th century. Some claim the rise of reason and science, especially in cities like Edinburgh, flushed out the old beliefs. Others argue that while public trials stopped, the fear of witches simply went underground, becoming a more personal domestic paranoia. You've seen enough garlic bundles and strange burn marks to suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. You meet an old woman named Aggie who lives at the edge of the south side, where the buildings thin out and the hills rise like sleeping beasts. She sells charms, quietly, discreetly. You stumble on her stall by accident, mistaking her satchel of dried nettle for loose tea. She grins a toothless grin and offers you a token, a piece of iron wrapped in red thread. "For protection," she says. "Wear it in your boot." You do, mostly because saying no to her feels like a bad idea. Then, one night, something happens that takes all of this from quaint to concerning. A girl in your tenement falls ill, young, maybe 9 or 10. One day she's playing in the stairwell, the next she's shrieking in her sleep, trembling, burning with fever. The doctor says it's just illness. But her mother's eyes say otherwise. She starts whispering to neighbours, pointing to the woman 2 floors up, the one with the odd cat and the jars of dried flowers hanging in her window. The woman who's never been sick, never lost a child, never needed help from anyone. By morning, there's chalk on the woman's door, a crude symbol. She's not accused outright, not yet, but you can feel the tide rising. Even the landlord pretends not to notice the muttered threats, the way people stop talking when she walks by. You ask someone what will happen. They shrug. She'll leave, if she's smart. If not, the girl recovers, eventually, just like that. No one says what changed. But the woman? She's gone. Her room stands empty. No one talks about it. You carry that image with you, the silent, unspoken exile of a woman who might have just been a healer, or maybe just unlucky, or maybe just different. You wonder how many others like her have been pushed to the edges of the city, or worse. You remember Janet Horn burned in a pit of fire while her neighbours watched. All because she was a little odd, a little old, a little inconvenient. One day, you walk past a group of children playing a game with stones and bones, chanting a rhyme you've never heard before. It ends with the words, "Witch on the wind, witch in the well, throw her in fire, send her to hell." They laugh. You don't. A quirky detail you learn from a travelling bookseller. Some of the earliest witch manuals are still in circulation, grim little texts filled with bizarre tests, remedies, and methods of detection. Float her in water, weigh her against a Bible, make her recite the Lord's Prayer backward. It sounds absurd, but people believed it, and some still do. You find yourself checking your own behaviour more carefully now. Don't walk barefoot too often. Don't speak too fondly of herbs. Don't spend too much time alone, because the line between peculiar and dangerous is razor thin here, and once the whispers start, they don't stop until you're gone. Still, The old beliefs have a strange power. You catch yourself leaving a scrap of bread at your windowsill during a storm, just in case. You tuck the iron charm Maggie gave you deeper into your boot. You find a stone shaped like a heart and carry it in your pocket for luck. You know better, logically. But in this city, logic doesn't always win. That night the wind howls over the rooftops, and you wake to the sound of a baby crying in the distance and a door slamming somewhere below. You clutch your blanket tighter, suddenly aware of every shadow, every creak, every story whispered in candlelight. You don't believe in witches, not really, but you're not about to test it. You can feel it shifting. Not the wind, not the weather, though both are predictably awful, but something quieter, something under the surface of all the soot and superstition. In the taverns and print shops and university halls, people are speaking in a new rhythm, with strange new words and ideas you've never heard in school, or perhaps only skimmed in textbooks with too many footnotes. These are the early rumbles of the Scottish Enlightenment, and somehow, impossibly, you've stumbled into it just in time. The contrast is jarring. Just yesterday you watched a man smear lard on his chest to ward off spirit sickness, and today you're walking past a pair of students debating moral philosophy as if it's the most natural thing in the world. On one side, there's a city still half buried in medieval rot. On the other, men, and very occasionally women, dreaming up entire new ways to understand humanity, politics, science, even art. The streets stink, but the minds, some of them are blazing. It begins for you in the back room of a bookseller's shop on Lawn Market. You're delivering a parcel, more second-hand pamphlets and ink-stained ledgers, and you pause when you hear the voices. Not arguing exactly, challenging. A group of men, half drunk on cheap claret and intellectual pride, are tossing around names you vaguely recognise. Hume, Hutcheson, Smith. One of them is sketching something on a scrap of parchment. Circles, arrows, big Latin words you can't quite read. They're trying to map out the soul like it's a street plan. You hover, listening. Eventually someone notices you and instead of waving you off, invites you in. A young man with ink all over his fingers hands you a mug of something warm and says, "You've got ears, might as well have thoughts." So you sit. It becomes your new favourite place. The gatherings are informal, held in parlours, attics, back rooms of taverns and bookshops. They call them salons or philosophical societies, though most are just clever people trying to understand the world before it swallows them whole. You mostly keep quiet at first, nodding along, absorbing the rhythm of their language. But then someone asks your opinion on whether morality comes from reason or sentiment, and you, through sheer panic, mumble something halfway intelligent. They laugh. Nod at you, with you. Suddenly you're part of it. That's the magic of this moment in Edinburgh's history. Unlike Paris or London, where access to ideas requires wealth and titles, this city thrives on the power of thought itself. You don't need a title, you need a mind. Well, a mind and a decent coat, because no one takes seriously a philosopher with lice visibly crawling across his collar. You start reading whatever you can get your hands on. The bookseller, who now treats you like an underpaid apprentice, lets you borrow pamphlets after hours. You squint by candlelight, poring over treatises on natural law, essays on taste and beauty, arguments for and against God, reason, monarchy, trade. It's dizzying, it's thrilling, it's also slightly dangerous. Because not everyone approves. The church, for one, is deeply uneasy about all this unfiltered thinking. Ministers grumble about godless philosophers and moral decay masquerading as progress. Some ideas are tolerated. Others, like Hume's suggestion that miracles might not be, real, draw outright fury. You're warned not to quote certain passages too loudly in public, lest someone mistake you for a heretic, or worse, an English sympathiser. There's a scholarly debate about how much the Enlightenment truly changed life for the average citizen. Some argue it was a purely elite movement, confined to educated men in powdered wigs. Others claim its ripples reached further, shifting how people understood class, government, and the nature of truth. You, stuck halfway between street labour and secret study group, suspect both are true. The city above the cobbles is thinking faster than the city on them, but give it time. One evening you find yourself walking alongside a real philosopher. Like a name. A man you've heard quoted in every salon now breathing the same smoky air as you, scratching at his beard with ink-stained fingers and muttering about moral sympathy. You listen. He talks. And then, astonishingly, he asks you what you think. You answer. He nods, then pauses and says, a novel way to look at it. You nearly fall into a puddle. It's not all high-mindedness, though. These thinkers have egos, tempers, rivalries. You witness more than one shouting match end in red-faced silence and someone storming off into the night. Some ideas are treated like religion, others like heresy. And always there's the undercurrent of class. If you speak too well, too confidently, someone will inevitably ask, "And what family are you from?" You lie, of course. Something vague and untraceable. It works, for now. A quirky moment arrives one afternoon when a physician delivers a lecture on the human body, using a wax model and a dead pig. Half the audience faints. The other half takes notes. You stare at the pig and wonder how anyone here survived long enough to invent medicine, let alone explain it. You also learn about the Select Society, a real intellectual group formed to debate everything from agriculture to moral theory. They're very exclusive. You never get in, but you do attend a public talk hosted by one of its members, disguised as a shop boy holding a parcel. It's a lecture on population growth and the future of cities, and it's so wildly optimistic that you nearly laugh out loud. You want to raise your hand and say, actually, in the future, we're still broke and rats still rule the alleys, but you keep that to yourself. Despite the limitations, this Enlightenment-era Edinburgh becomes your secret second world. You slog through freezing tenement mornings, dodge waste in the streets, endure the church's iron grip. But at night, you sit by a fire, debating whether beauty is objective or subjective, whether man is inherently good or shaped by society. It doesn't fix anything, but it makes the filth feel smaller. And slowly, something inside you changes. You no longer see the city as a pit of smoke and suffering. You see it as a contradiction, a place where rats scamper across cobblestones while geniuses sketch the future, a city too small for the ideas it's housing, a city bursting at the seams. You go to bed that night with a book under your pillow and the ghost of a new idea rattling around in your head. You're still cold, still poor, still uncertain about which parts of your personality might get you accused of witchcraft. But now you have something else. You have thoughts. Dangerous, brilliant, world-bending thoughts. And in 1700s Edinburgh, that's the closest thing to magic. You're trudging up the Royal Mile with a basket full of coal scraps and bread crusts when you round a corner and nearly walk straight into David Hume. You don't recognise him at first. To be fair, he looks like someone's accountant. A little stout, round-faced, wearing a powdered wig that's slightly crooked and a coat more practical than polished. But there's something about him. Maybe it's the way he walks, slowly and with absolute confidence, like the entire street belongs to his mind. Or maybe it's because someone behind you mutters, "There goes Hume again, off to annoy the church." You freeze, basket hanging off your arm, torn between fight, flight and fangirl. You're looking at one of the most influential philosophers in history, right here, in this stinking, clattering, glorious chaos of 1700s Edinburgh. What do? Say hi? No. That's madness. He's a famous man. You're a time-travelling pauper with straw in your hair. But still, you can't help yourself. You follow. He heads down toward the Netherbow past shops and carriages, nodding to no one in particular. You're doing your best to not be obvious about it. Just another plebe with a coal basket and some very inappropriate excitement. But when he suddenly stops and turns, you nearly drop your load. "You've been tailing me for half a block," he says without looking at you. "Either say something or stop wasting both our time." Your mouth dries up faster than a summer puddle. "I admire your work." He turns fully now, eyeing you like a grocer assessing a bruised apple. Which bit? The part that upset the church, or the part no one understood? You blink. The treatise and your essays, especially the one about miracles, the logic I mean, it's bold. He snorts. Bold? Or irritating? But then he smiles. Not warm exactly, but amused. Not many in this city have read my work, let alone remembered it. Come, walk with me. And just like that, you're walking down the cobbled street beside one of the great minds of the Enlightenment, desperately trying to act like you belong. He talks, mostly, about the weather, which he hates, about the Kirk, which he hates more, about Edinburgh's snobbery, the hypocrisy of clergymen, and the annoying habit of people praising his essays without buying them. "You know," he says, "I write these things not for vanity, but because I want to understand people, and half the time, I don't think they want to understand themselves." You nod vigorously. Too vigorously. Yes. I mean, I think that's still true, in general, broadly speaking. He glances sideways. You speak like someone who's lived in too many centuries. You smile, a little too tightly. That afternoon becomes a blur of impressions. He leads you, without formal invitation, into a tavern near the university. The room is smoky, lined with books and students pretending not to eavesdrop. Hume orders wine. You sip slowly, trying not to betray the fact that you haven't had a decent meal in days. He's sharp, but not cruel. Funny, but always a little removed. He's clearly used to being the smartest man in every room and just a little tired of it. What surprises you most is how human he is. Not the cold, hyper-rational figure from the textbooks, but someone who gets excited when arguing about cause and effect, and then complains about the price of mutton the next breath. At one point, he leans across the table and says, "You know, I don't believe in souls, or the self, really. Just impressions, perceptions, things we stitch together to make a person." You nod. Yes, but that's stitching. Doesn't that count for something, even if it's just habit? He grins. Spoken like a man who wants to believe in something. Habit, yes. Perhaps habit is the only god worth serving. You leave the tavern hours later, brain buzzing, feet frozen, stomach still half empty but heart full. You've spoken with David Hume, shared a bench, asked him questions you were never supposed to ask. It feels surreal, unreal, but also normal. In this city, in this moment, ideas are the great equalizer. You may be poor, filthy and marginally lice-ridden, but if you can think, you can matter. The next day, you see him again on Princes Street, walking with another man, taller, leaner, wearing a crisp coat and a very serious expression. That's Adam Smith, you realise, father of economics, friend of Hume, a man whose theories will shape the capitalist world you came from for better or worse. You don't speak to them this time, just watch. And something about the image, two men with wildly different ideas walking side by side in the biting Edinburgh wind, stays with you. A quirky fact, Hume was never fully accepted in Edinburgh society despite his fame. He was too atheist for the church crowd, too irreverent for the aristocrats, too intellectual for the working class. He was beloved in France, ridiculed at home. Still, he walked these streets like he owned them, not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't need approval to feel real. Scholars debate how much influence Hume truly had in his own time. Some say he was dismissed, ignored, sidelined. Others argue he was laying philosophical dynamite that would reshape the foundation of Western thought. You suspect both are true, you felt it. The clarity of his thought, the dangerous comfort of his skepticism. Later that week you catch wind of another salon, this one behind a shop run by a woman who pretends to sell lace, but mostly hosts debates about poetry and politics. You're invited. Hume's name is mentioned, but he's not there. Instead, you hear others discuss his ideas, quote him, mock him, praise him. His presence lingers like candle smoke. That night you return to your tiny room and find a scrap of parchment tucked under your door. One sentence written in careful hand. Truth springs from argument amongst friends. No name, just that, a reminder. A gift? A warning? You go to bed wrapped in your coat, the wind howling outside, and you think about souls that don't exist and habits that define us. About a man who laughed at miracles and still hoped to be remembered. You think, maybe this century isn't so bad after all. The thing about press gangs is that they don't care who you are. Educated, poor, fluent in moral philosophy, 3 days deep into a rat-catching gig, none of that matters. If you're male-presenting, able-bodied and unfortunate enough to look unoccupied on the street at the wrong moment, you're fair game. And now you're running. It starts innocently. You're heading back from the bakery with a heel of yesterday's bread when you notice the street's gone a little still. Not quiet. Edinburgh's never actually quiet. But still in that strange, coiled way right before someone throws a punch or a cow kicks over a lantern. A few people are backing into doorways. A child bolts into an alley. A woman grabs her husband's coat and yanks him down a close without explanation. That's when you hear it. The stomp of boots, uniformed, purposeful, way too close for comfort. You don't wait, you drop the bread and bolt. "Oi! You there!" someone shouts behind you. You don't turn around to check if it's really a press gang, you already know. Who else chases people down in broad daylight while waving official-looking papers and wooden clubs? Here's what you've pieced together about how it works. Britain's navy is expanding, the empire is growing, and ships need sailors desperately. But instead of, recruiting people willingly, the navy resorts to impressment, a delightful little practice where men are snatched off the street, pressed into service, and hauled off to sea with barely time to say goodbye or pack a pair of socks. And Edinburgh, being a city with a thriving port not far off, is prime hunting ground. The men in the gang are technically allowed to conscript sailors and idle men. Of course, idle is a wonderfully vague word. Reading a pamphlet? Idle. Carrying a bucket without looking busy enough? Idle. Breathing too slowly in a public square? Probably idle. The only way to avoid their notice is to look like you already belong to someone else. Apprentices are safer, tradesmen with tools, usually left alone. Clergymen, scholars and nobility, untouchable. But you're not any of those things. You're just you, quick-witted, underfed and definitely too available for comfort. You duck into a tannery and come out smelling like raw leather and despair. But the gang's moved on, for now. You spend the next week perfecting the art of looking useless. Not lazy, not idle, just clearly claimed. You borrow a battered set of carpenter's tools from your neighbour and carry them everywhere. Doesn't matter that you have no idea what they do. You sling them over your shoulder and walk like you've just finished building a small cathedral. You also learn to walk with a slight limp. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to suggest you're not worth the king's coin. Press gangs don't want the injured. Bad return on investment. One afternoon, a fellow tenant teaches you the fine art of the fake apprenticeship contract. It's a scrap of parchment with random scribbles and the name of a master who no longer exists, but it works. You flash it once when a gang member looks your way, and he waves you off like you've got the plague. A quirky side note. Some men volunteered to be impressed. Shocking, right? But it's true. Life on land was so grim for some that the idea of a steady wage, with food and rum no less, on a navy vessel, actually seemed appealing. You, however, know better. You've heard stories. Cramped quarters, disease, brutal discipline, endless months at sea. One man came back with one eye, a missing ear, and the ability to sleep standing up. You don't ask him for details. There's one day you can't forget. A boy, maybe 16, is grabbed just outside the market. He shouts that he's a baker's apprentice, that his master is right nearby. They ask for proof. He has none. Within moments, he's pulled into the back of a wagon. His mother runs after them, screaming. You stand still, heart thudding, tools clutched to your chest like a shield. The gang doesn't even glance your way. You think about that boy a lot. There's some scholarly disagreement on just how widespread impressment was in Scotland during the 18th century. Some historians claim it was more of a threat than a common occurrence, used as a deterrent against idleness and petty crime. Others argue that in port cities like Leith, right outside Edinburgh, press gangs were ruthless and active, dragging hundreds of men onto ships they never returned from. You lean toward the latter, mostly because you've been chased twice now, and you've developed an allergic reaction to the sound of boots on cobblestones. Eventually your routine becomes second nature. You carry tools, you walk with purpose, you whistle work songs you've heard from stonemasons, you even get a fake smear of soot on your cheek every morning, just to really sell the illusion. You've become a full-time actor in the ongoing play of Don't Take Me to Sea. There are other strategies too. One man in your building walks around with a priest's collar he stole from a laundry line. He's not a priest, obviously, but no one questions him. Another claims he's deaf and speaks only in grunts. A woman you know dresses her younger brother in rags and makes him push a cart so he looks like a disabled servant. Morally questionable? Absolutely. Effective? Also yes. You asked someone once, what happens if you do get taken? They shrug. Best case? You come back. Worst case? The sea gets you. Either way, you're not here anymore. Eventually you get used to the fear, not in the sense that it goes away, just that it becomes background noise, like the stink of the gutters or the sound of rats in the walls. You learn to read a crowd, to spot a uniform at 100 paces, to duck into a doorway without breaking stride. But the truth is, you never really feel safe. Because the press gang doesn't need a reason, they just need you, so you keep the limp, you keep the tools, you keep your head down, and every time someone shouts in the distance, every time boots clatter too fast, you still flinch. Because in this version of Edinburgh, being in the wrong place at the wrong time doesn't mean a scolding, and it means you disappear. You always thought marriage was a big white dress, a band, some awkward dancing, maybe a few questionable speeches and a very expensive cake. Turns out, in 1700s Edinburgh, marriage is mostly paperwork, panic, and the looming dread of lifelong economic entanglement. And that's if you're lucky. If you're not, it's scandal, shame, and a baby arriving 3 months after the vows, which no one mentions out loud, but absolutely everyone knows. It starts when you catch the eye of someone in the market. Let's say it's a baker's daughter, or son, depending on your taste and whether you want this whole thing to spiral into extra social danger. They smile at you, and it's not one of those vague, polite nods. It's real, warm, the kind of smile that, in your world, might lead to coffee and bad dates and ghosting by week 3. But here, one meaningful glance and a stroll around the meadows might as well be an engagement. And now, you're in it. Dating as a concept doesn't exist yet. Courtship is what they call it. An elaborate dance involving chaperones, family negotiations, and careful management of your reputation, which is a brittle, glass-like thing that can shatter under even the softest scandal. You meet in public, you talk in front of others, and if anyone suspects something more intimate is going on, you risk being labelled as fast, which is the 18th century equivalent of problematic. But maybe you keep seeing each other. You sneak moments when no one's watching. You brush fingers while handing over a roll. You leave a flower on their windowsill and pretend it's from someone else. It's sweet, it's dangerous, and it builds into something you can't ignore. Then comes the legal part. In Edinburgh, you don't even need a priest or church bells to get married. Scotland's marriage laws are famously lax during this period. All you need is mutual consent and, get this, 2 witnesses. That's it. You declare yourselves married, someone hears you say it, and congratulations. You've just entered a legally binding contract more ironclad than some modern mortgage agreements. Of course, people abuse this system. Elopements are common. The most famous spot is Gretna Green, just over the English border, where young lovers fleeing strict parents or unwanted betrothals can marry with almost theatrical speed. It's romantic. It's chaotic. It's also proof that even in a time of wigs and waistcoats, hormones will always find a loophole. Back in the city, though, marriages are less dramatic and more strategic. Love isn't always part of the equation. Property, alliances, family reputation, those are the real concerns. For women especially, marriage is often the only acceptable path to a stable life. Once married, a woman's legal identity effectively vanishes. She becomes one with her husband in the eyes of the law. You're not you anymore, you're his. You hear stories of young women pushed into unions with older men for land, for money, for status. You hear about men marrying widows for their connections or their dowries. You also hear about people who fall in love, marry quietly, and somehow make it work without destroying their lives. It's rare, but it happens. There's a neighbour of yours, Mrs. Craig, who married at 17, had 8 children, buried 3 of them, and still sits with her husband by the fire each evening, shelling peas and gossiping like newlyweds. When you ask her what the secret is, she says, "He lets me talk and I let him think he's clever. That's all."
Of course, not every match works out so sweetly. In Edinburgh, divorce is nearly impossible unless you're very rich or very connected. Annulment is rare. Separation might happen, but remarriage? Not without a full-blown court case and a mountain of humiliation. So if you pick wrong, you're basically locked in until death. Or, in certain very quiet cases, mysterious disappearance. There's a scholarly debate about whether the freedom of Scottish marriage law empowered the lower classes or just made them more vulnerable to exploitation. Some say it allowed more romantic flexibility than in England. Others argue that without formal oversight, it left women in particular open to abandonment and fraud. You watch it play out in your own tenement. A young woman gets promised by a traveling cooper. She's seen wearing his ribbon, everyone assumes it's done, and then he leaves. Just gone. She's stuck with the shame and a swelling belly. No ceremony, no legal recourse, just quiet pity and sharp whispers. And then there's the other trap, marriage as survival. One particularly cold week, you catch yourself considering a proposal from someone you don't even like that much, just because they have a second blanket and a job that doesn't involve dead fish. You'd share food. You'd share rent. You'd have a fire every night and someone to rub your feet. It's not romance, it's economics. And that's how it works for a lot of people here. Not about happiness, about heat. A quirky little detail you pick up from an older man in the tavern. Some couples perform hand fasting, an older tradition where they agree to live as husband and wife for a year and a day before deciding whether to make it permanent. It's technically not church-sanctioned anymore, but people still do it quietly. You ask if it works. He grins and says, "Well, my third wife was the best of the three." You're still not sure what to do about your own situation. Maybe you're not ready. Maybe you're terrified. Maybe you just enjoy being kissed behind the alehouse too much to ruin it with a legal contract. But you feel the pressure, the unspoken rule that everyone must pair off eventually, that to remain single too long is suspicious, pitiable, or both. One night, you overhear two matrons whispering about you on the stairs. One says, "Strange they haven't settled yet." The other replies, "Maybe they've got secrets." You consider turning around and yelling that your only secret is an allergy to commitment, but you let it pass. The truth is, in 1700s Edinburgh, marriage is both shield and shackle. It can protect you from scandal, poverty, and isolation, but it can also trap you in obligations you never asked for. It can offer companionship or remind you daily that you made a terrible mistake. So for now, you keep walking. Keep smiling at the baker's daughter. Keep your options open. Maybe one day you'll say the words in front of witnesses. Maybe you'll run to Gretna Green with your heart pounding and your future uncertain. Or maybe you'll stay single forever, dying alone in a tenement with 20 cats and a very sharp wit. Whatever you choose, just be sure of one thing. You'll never look at wedding vows the same way again. You don't expect it to happen on a Tuesday morning. The sun's barely up, the usual city filth is just starting to warm and ferment, and you're in the middle of trying to coax heat from your fire with a bundle of soggy straw. And then, a sound like a cannon going off inside your wall. You jump half a foot off the floor. The room shudders. The air suddenly feels wrong, like the building just took a breath in and forgot how to let it out. It isn't a cannon, it's your pipes. Or what passes for plumbing in your 1700s Edinburgh tenement, which is really just a series of angry, half-frozen wooden conduits slathered in tar and prayer. And today, one of them has given up. With a second, wetter-sounding crack, water explodes from the corner, spraying out of a gap between wall and floor with the pressure of a drunkard defending his last pint. You leap backward, socks instantly soaked. The fire gives a mournful hiss and dies. There goes warmth. There goes comfort. There goes your one good pair of wool stockings. You shout up the stairwell, hoping for help, but what you get instead is a rat. Not one, not two, 5. They come scurrying out of the wall like they've been waiting for this moment. Big, bold, and not remotely scared of you. You fling a broom at them and miss by a mile. One pauses, gives you the side eye, and then trots over your collapsed bedding like it pays rent. Disaster has arrived. The thing about plumbing in your building is that it's not really plumbing. Most tenements in Edinburgh at this time don't have running water, and if they do, it's only for the lucky folks in the fancier rooms, and it usually comes from a shared cistern system. Basic wooden or lead pipes that are constantly either leaking or freezing. Your particular tenement has one pipe that occasionally groans to life when the pressure builds from the well down the road. That pipe is now very much not functioning. There's no plumber to call, no emergency hotline. What you do have is the landlord, a woman named Mrs. Kemp who smells of turpentine and has a moral allergy to spending money. You climb the stairs, dripping wet, and knock on her door. She opens it wearing a bonnet and a look that could curdle milk. You explain the situation. She sighs. "Well," she says, "don't pour oil down the floorboards next time, and maybe the rats won't come sniffing." "I didn't," you start, but she's already shut the door, so you go back downstairs and start bailing. With a ladle, from your soup pot, that you were going to use for dinner. The water is icy and smells like it came out of a cursed bog. And the rats? Oh, they're having a party. They dance along the beams, sniff at your food stores, and occasionally squeak in a tone you're convinced is mocking. A neighbor passes your door, sees your plight, and offers a scrap of old carpet. You use it to dam the flow, sort of. It doesn't help much, but at least now your socks aren't floating. A quirky fact someone tells you while you're trying to air out your mattress. Back in the day, the town council used to set official water drawing hours for public wells to prevent overcrowding. entire fights would break out over queue jumping and short pours. Some even turned violent. Compared to that, your flood seems almost tame. Almost. It gets worse when you realize that your downstairs neighbor, Mr. Dalrymple, professional drunk and part-time shout enthusiast, is now also flooding. And unlike you, he assumes every problem is a personal attack. He pounds up the stairs and bangs on your door with the fury of a man who once lost a hat and never recovered. "You trying to drown me, you little rat-spawned miscreant?" "I am also drowning," you say through gritted teeth. He stomps off, muttering something about curses and landlord conspiracies. By the end of the day, you've lost half your food, most of your bedding, and all of your patience. The firewood is damp, your cloak smells like mildew, and the rats, clever little horrors, have found a way into your larder and dragged out what remains of your oatcakes. You sit on your bed, which now squelches slightly, and consider crying. But instead, you start laughing. Because of course this happens now. Right after you almost got press-ganged. Right after you were halfway convinced to propose to someone because they had a functioning hearth. Right after you met David Hume and briefly felt like a sentient being with ideas. And now, here you are, soaked, freezing, and swatting at rodents like you're in the worst possible fever dream. There's a debate among historians about just how bad housing conditions were in Old Town Edinburgh. Some suggest exaggeration, citing city records about repairs and improvements. Others argue that the wealthier classes pushed those narratives to cover up the neglect of the poor. You'd like to weigh in personally with this first-hand account. It's absolutely miserable. You spend the night in your neighbor's room, the nice one, the one who feeds stray cats and lets you borrow books. She lets you sleep near her fire and shares some turnip broth that tastes like salvation. In exchange, you sweep her floor and promise to help repair the rat-chewed cupboard. It's not much, but it's kindness. And in this city, that's rare gold. The next morning, you return to your room to find that Mrs. Kemp has helpfully shoved a wooden board over the broken pipe. The water has slowed to a trickle. The rats are gone, for now. You start cleaning, salvaging what you can. You boil everything, hang your clothes from the window, and swear out loud more creatively than you have in weeks. There's a sense of survival to it, a grim, angry joy. You've lost more than you care to admit since you arrived in this era. Comfort, privacy, even dignity. But every time something goes wrong, you patch it together, sometimes with tar, sometimes with lies, sometimes with borrowed blankets. You lie down that night on your nearly dry bed, listening to the faint scurrying of rodents in the wall and the rhythmic drip of whatever remains in the pipe. You feel exhausted, but alive. And tomorrow, you'll find more wood. You'll restock your food, maybe even buy a cat. Because in 1700s Edinburgh, surviving a plumbing disaster and a rat invasion without committing arson is practically a personal victory. The invitation is unexpected. It's not embossed parchment sealed with wax, nothing so formal. It's more of a shout across the stairwell from your upstairs neighbor, Tam, a cooper who smells permanently of ale and sawdust. "Seely down by the grass market tonight. Come on, you grim wee spectre. You look like you haven't danced since you crawled out the womb." You raise an eyebrow. You've heard the word before, seelith, but never been to one. A party, yes. But in Edinburgh? In the 1700s? This grimy, damp, superstitious, enlightenment-drenched city doesn't strike you as a place that cuts loose often. And yet, somehow, it does. When the week's work is done, when debts are mostly paid, and when the moon is full enough to light the closes, people gather to party like it's 1799, even if it's only 1743. You put on your cleanest shirt, which is frankly a low bar, and follow the sound of laughter and fiddles down the winding winds toward the grass market. The streets feel different tonight, less threatening, more alive. Candles flicker in upper windows, casting shadows that dance like mischievous spirits. You hear clapping, stamping, the rhythmic drone of a pipe, and beneath it all, the infectious hum of people who are not working, not praying, and not freezing to death, for once. The Cheelith is in a courtyard, strung up with lanterns that swing gently in the breeze, their glow catching on the faces of neighbors you've only ever seen frowning or asleep. Now they're grinning, mugs raised high, cheeks flushed with drink and exertion. Someone presses a tankard into your hand before you can protest, and it's heavy, warm, sloshing with something vaguely brown and overwhelmingly alcoholic. It's ale, and not the weak, watered-down kind they feed to children and the very old. This is the hearty, elbow-you-in-the-stomach kind of brew that tastes like it's been steeped in oak barrels and community arguments. You sip it cautiously. It hits like a kick and settles like a hug. Then the music surges. Two fiddlers, brothers apparently, start up a reel that shakes the teeth in your skull. A woman with a bodhran joins in, thumping out a rhythm that feels older than the street beneath your feet. You barely have time to take another drink before someone grabs your arm and pulls you into a circle. You're dancing before you even understand the steps. It's wild, chaotic, glorious. The Sealith isn't about elegance or performance. It's stomping and spinning, laughing and sweating, yelling lyrics you don't understand, and not caring that you've already stepped on four people's toes. You get partnered with a girl who could throw you across the street and a boy who giggles every time you mess up the turn. At one point, someone lifts you off the ground entirely. You don't know if it's part of the dance or if they're just enthusiastic, but your feet leave the cobblestones and you scream laugh like a lunatic. And just like that, something cracks open inside you. Joy, not the cautious, restrained kind you've trained yourself to have in this century, but the full-bodied, dizzying kind that tastes like smoke and sweet malt and the touch of another hand in yours. People dance until their breath gives out and then drink until their legs remember how to move again. There's food, oatcakes, fried things wrapped in cloth, some kind of roasted root vegetable that tastes better than it has any right to. A woman hands you a hunk of cheese with no explanation. You eat it. You don't ask. A quirky fact floats into your beer-soaked brain around your third round. Sealiths were once held to mark seasonal festivals, marriages, or significant events, harvests, births, even wakes. But in the cities, especially in tenement communities like yours, they've become a kind of social glue, a ritual of defiance, against the cold, against the rats, against death itself. Because here's the thing. Life in 1700s Edinburgh is hard. It is unrelentingly difficult. But humans are resilient and wildly unreasonable. They will work 16 hours hauling fish guts and still find the energy to kick up their heels to a tune that hasn't changed in 200 years. At one point, you slip away to the edge of the courtyard, catching your breath near a barrel someone's using as a makeshift bench. A woman sits beside you, humming the last tune with a glazed, happy look in her eyes. "You're new," she says. You nod, wiping sweat from your neck. "Still learning the steps." "No one knows the steps," she grins. "That's the fun." You clink mugs. It's the most profound moment of your week. There's a scholarly debate about whether the Cheelith, in its popular form, was truly a common occurrence in urban Scotland during the 18th century. Or if it's a romanticized hangover from earlier Highland culture. Some argue that city folk were too burdened with labor and piety to indulge in such merriment. Others claim the gatherings were essential to mental and emotional survival, especially among the lower classes. From where you're sitting, half drunk, fully euphoric, and newly aware that your boots are missing, you'd argue for the latter. Later, when the music slows, someone recites a poem. It's long, mournful, full of mist and sorrow and boats leaving shore. People go quiet. Even the drunkest among them listen. There's something sacred in the silence that follows, a shared breath held between all of you. And then the spell breaks, and the dancing begins again. You dance until your legs cramp. You drink until your teeth feel fuzzy. You sing songs in a language you only half understand, and wake the next morning in a stranger's room, curled up beside a half-eaten oatcake and someone's pet chicken. Your head is pounding, your shirt is missing a button, and your mouth tastes like you tried to chew on a fireplace. But your heart? It feels whole. Because for one night, you weren't just surviving, you were living. You step back into the daylight, bleary-eyed and unsteady, and the city is still gray, still damp, still infested with disease, superstition, and the occasional boot thief. But now you know this. Even here, joy finds a way. It's loud, it's messy, and it wears a tartan sash tied around its head like a crown. You wake to screaming. Not the fun kind. Not the someone fell into a barrel after too much ale kind, or the there's a rat in the kitchen kind. This is a different scream. Sharp, angry, urgent. You sit bolt upright, heart pounding, instantly hung over from the ceileth, but alert in that way only true terror can trigger. You run to the window and peer out, blinking against the early morning haze, and what you see is chaos. A riot is spilling into the street. At first, it looks like a market gone wrong. Carts overturned, apples rolling downhill like they're staging a fruit rebellion. A woman with a shawl over her face throws a rock at a shop window, and glass shatters in a sparkling scream. Then, the crowd shifts, and you see it's not just random violence, it's organized, or angry enough to look like it. You recognize some faces, neighbors, local tradesmen, even the boy who usually sells limp flowers by the church door. But they aren't working today. They're shouting, shoving, some waving tools like weapons. Someone tosses a bucket of ash at a pair of men in red coats, British soldiers. You recoil, because now you know exactly what's going on. Bread prices, taxes, military conscription. Doesn't matter which spark lit the fire today. Edinburgh has been simmering for weeks. Rumors of another tax hike, whispers of soldiers being quartered in homes without consent, the endless tension between the government and the working class. It's all come to a boil. And you're right in the middle of it. You've heard about riots before, of course. Even in the 1700s, public protest isn't new. But riots in Edinburgh have their own flavor. Tight closes make for dangerous bottlenecks, and tenement balconies turn into perfect spots for throwing rocks, boiling water, or worse. It's not just a mob, it's a machine, running on fear and frustration. A scholarly debate you remember flashes in your mind as you watch the streets spiral out of control. Some historians argue that these outbursts were the only real power the poor had, short-lived eruptions of collective will in a system rigged against them. Others dismiss them as chaotic, meaningless violence. But watching it now, you see the truth. It's both. It's rage, yes, but it's also a message. You have a decision to make. Do you stay inside and wait it out? That feels safe, sensible. But then the smoke starts. Not thick yet, but it's coming from somewhere close. A cart's been set alight, then another. The fire crackles like it's cheering the riot on. The crowd surges again. You hear boots on the stairs outside. Someone fleeing, someone pursuing. Hard to tell. There's no time to wonder. You throw your cloak over your shoulders and grab your satchel, just in case. You step into the stairwell, into the noise, into history. Down in the street, it's worse than you imagined. The soldiers have formed a line, their muskets raised, bayonets glinting. The crowd doesn't back down. Someone is shouting about justice. Someone else is weeping over a broken crate of potatoes. A third person hurls what looks like an entire cabbage at a mounted officer. Your instinct is to run, but something else holds you. Fascination? Maybe. But also fear that if you turn your back, you'll be swept up anyway. Better to see it coming. A woman grabs your hand. You recognize her from the laundress's room down the hall. "Come on," she hisses, dragging you toward an alley. They'll shoot. They always do. You don't argue. The alley's narrow, dark, and slick, with something you don't investigate too closely. You squeeze through with your back pressed to stone, the sounds of the riot echoing around you, boots on cobbles, metal on wood, the occasional scream of pain or fury or both. Eventually, you reach a back street where the noise fades just enough to think. You take shelter in a storage shed behind a bakery, your breath loud in your ears. The woman lights a stub of candle. You sit on a pile of flour sacks and try not to pass out from the adrenaline. "What started it?" you ask. "Bread again," she mutters. "Always bread. That and the English. Always the bloody English." Another quirky detail you remember. Edinburgh had its own version of bread riots more than once. In 1740, the price of oatmeal spiked, and crowds stormed bakers' shops. In 1778, anti-Catholic riots left entire sections of the city scorched. Sometimes it's about religion, sometimes taxes, sometimes conscription. But the root cause is always the same: survival. People can only be squeezed so far. After an hour, you edge back toward the main road. The crowd has thinned. The soldiers have pushed most of the rioters back toward the cowgate. Smoke still curls from a few barrels, but the worst seems over. For now. You see what's left behind. Shattered shop fronts, blood on the stones, a trampled bonnet, the kind of quiet that follows real violence, not peace, just exhaustion. You help a man stand up from the gutter. He's got a cut above his eye and a dazed look like he's been dropped from a rooftop. "Did we win?" he asks. You don't have an answer. Back at your tenement, the door is still hanging open. Someone's taken your spare cloak. The baker's boy is sitting on the stairs with a busted lip and a black eye. You sit beside him. He doesn't speak, but after a while, he leans his head against your shoulder. You think about how close it all came to burning down, and how quickly it will all reset tomorrow. The city doesn't stop for long. People will go back to work, pretending it didn't happen. Soldiers will patrol a little more aggressively. The bakers will raise their prices quietly. And beneath it all, the fire will still smolder. Because in 1700s Edinburgh, you don't need a battlefield to feel like a soldier. Sometimes just being here is its own kind of war. You're sitting in a candlelit room with a torn boot, 2 shillings to your name, and the faint smell of smoke still clinging to your coat from yesterday's riot. When it hits you, you've survived, not thrived, not triumphed, not conquered like some heroic figure in a tale scribbled by a historian centuries later, but survived, lived, breathed, and in a place like 1700s Edinburgh, that counts for more than you ever expected. You look around the room, still half damp from the flood 2 weeks ago, the wall patched with a warped board, a rat-chewed corner hidden under your cloak, and you feel it. Not pride, exactly, but a grim sort of satisfaction. Like you made it through a gauntlet that should have broken you. And now, you're starting to wonder, how much longer can you keep this up? The thought has been growing like mold in your ceiling, dark and slow and impossible to ignore. Because there are only so many rats you can swat away, so many near-miss press gangs you can dodge, so many days you can go without real warmth or privacy or bread that doesn't crumble into dust at the first bite. And while the city lives, you're starting to feel like you're decaying inside it. So you start to think about your exit strategy. You've seen how people disappear. Not dramatically. There are no grand stage exits in this place. They just slip out one morning before the sun rises. A bed left cold, a tenant unpaid. Sometimes you hear rumors. Gone to Glasgow. Off to the colonies. Married a merchant and left for Aberdeen. You know half of them are lies, but that's the beauty of it, isn't it? No one checks, no one follows. You leave and you become a myth or a ghost or a footnote. You don't need much. A few coins, a believable story, a way to vanish without drawing attention. You've been laying the groundwork for weeks now, visiting the docks more often, asking quiet questions at taverns where no one remembers your face the next morning. There's talk of a vessel heading for the Low Countries, another for the Americas. You're not picky. You just want out. But you can't just leave. Not without faking your death first. Because, let's be honest, there are still debts to your name, suspicious eyes on your back, and possibly a landlord who believes you owe her a goat. A clean break isn't clean unless people believe there's no reason to look for you. You float the idea to your neighbor, Casper, the friendly grave robber. And yes, that's what he does when the anatomy schools run low on specimens. He raises an eyebrow, then shrugs. Could be done, he says. Plenty of ways a body goes missing in this town. River's a good one. Or leave a boot by Arthur's seat and let the crows take care of the rest. Dark, but not untrue. There's a quirky historical trend you latch onto. False death stories weren't entirely unheard of in this period, especially in port cities. A sailor declared lost at sea turns up in Barbados 2 years later, married to someone new. A debtor disappears during a fire, only for a very similar-looking stranger to show up in Glasgow weeks later with an English accent and a limp. The records were messy. People could vanish if they were clever. You plan to be very clever. You spend the next few days crafting your plan. You write a letter, vaguely tear-stained, addressed to no one in particular, with dramatic lines like, "I can no longer bear the cold and the noise and the stink of this life." You leave it on your cot, weighted with a stone and a half-eaten oatcake. Your boots, the good ones, you tuck into the mouth of a close near the Nor Loch, where more than one unfortunate soul has been dragged in over the years. You're betting no one will question another sad ending. Then, very early one morning, just as the bells are ringing for some minor saint's feast day, no one truly celebrates, you make your way to the docks. The mist is thick, curling around the masts like ghost fingers. You pay a man with a bad accent and a worse haircut a few shillings for silence and passage. You don't look back. As the ship creaks away from the stone edge of Edinburgh, you stare at the city for what you hope is the last time. The towers and smoke and spires blur together into something almost beautiful from a distance. You think about all the things you'll carry with you: sore feet, smarter lies, and the ability to smell spoiled meat from 50 paces. And yes, a little longing too, because for all its grime and death and freezing nights, Edinburgh taught you how to live when everything is stacked against you, how to fight for scraps of kindness, how to find warmth in dance halls and secret debates, how to laugh with people who have nothing but time and turnips, how to disappear. The scholars will never write about you. Your name won't appear in footnotes or court records or faded letters tucked into archives. But if someone ever asked, really asked, you'd say this: you came to a city that wanted to crush you, and you didn't let it. You left it instead. And somewhere out there, across the sea or down another winding alley in another century, you'll keep surviving. Because now you know how. So, you made it, against the odds, through the filth and fear, the rats and riots, the back-breaking work, and the endless stink of coal smoke and body odor. You did it. You lived in the 1700s Edinburgh, and miraculously, you're still breathing. Maybe a little more cynical, definitely more paranoid, probably still scratching at imaginary fleas, but alive. That deserves a slow clap. You walked the Royal Mile with your head down and your senses on high alert. You navigated tenement politics, side-eyed the Kirk, dodged press gangs, and survived one very bad plumbing situation involving rats that may or may not have formed a union. You learned to blend in, to speak carefully, to fake trades and injuries and emotions. You found light in dark places, in philosophy salons, Teelith dances, and in the rare warmth of shared turnip soup by a fire that didn't explode. You didn't just survive history, you outsmarted it. And now, as you sit back in the relative comfort of your own time, maybe in a soft bed, maybe with a cat curled beside you, maybe with a fan humming gently like a lullaby, you can look back and appreciate what you have. Not just running water and toothpaste and central heating, but peace, quiet, time. Because after spending a life in a place that never stopped moving, where every day demanded your energy just to stay one step ahead of death, your own life now feels softer, gentler. And maybe you'll take a little piece of that hard-won grit with you tomorrow, into your own world, into your own battles. Just remember, in a city full of ghosts, you became one, and then you vanished before it could claim you. Good night, time traveler. You earned it.